Night held the red keep in its iron hand. All those towers and terrace gardens, the rising and falling of stone and shadow, the steep steps where starlight snagged like threads on old banisters, the narrow windows where the sea slipped in as a low smell of salt and rotting weed. In the God's Wood the air was colder, as if the grove remembered snows that had never fallen so far south. The heart tree was no great pale giant with a bleeding face, only the stump of a weirwood cut long ago, scarred and smoothed by centuries of wind. The other trees kept it company. The tall chestnuts and the laurels trimmed into cones, the black-green olives. But it was to the stump that Eddard Stark went, moving like a man walking under a weight that did not show itself to the eye. The sword at his hip tapped lightly against the scabbard as he passed beneath a bower. He had come from the Tower of the Hand by hidden ways he had learned quickly after arriving in this city of whispers. His guards were asleep or pretending to be, and the gold cloaks that patrolled the outer walls knew the rhythm of a king's keep grown lax under wine, whores, and the indifference that comes with a realm at peace only because it is too tired for fresh killing. The night insects sang in the grass and a frog burped from the little green pool at the grove's center, untroubled by any thought of kings or wars. Ned breathed, and the breath lifted from him like steam he could not see, but felt. He had the letter under his tunic where the skin of his chest was still damp with the day's heat. It had arrived at dusk, a raven battered and black-eyed and furious from its long flight. When he broke the seal he had known before he saw the hand on the page whose wax it was, the reeds and spirals and the ripples of a marsh in miniature, made by someone who had never learned to write the shapes of Southron letters without drawing meaning into them, as if truth must be caught and held like a fish that would wriggle away. Howland Reed had been with him at the end of the long road to a tower that no longer stood. Howland had stood unarmored with a boar spear and a simple iron cap while lords in bright enamel and white cloaks turned toward them, as unmoving as statues until the swords began to ring. Ned knelt and put his palm to the weirwood's weathered crown. The gods here were far from home, but they had a way of listening if a man was simple with them. He did not ask anything. He had asked too many things of gods who could not give his sister back. It was not a night for asking anyway. It was a night for saying what he had not said in 15 years. He took the letter out and unfolded it and read again by feel as much as I, for he had every stroke committed to memory now, the scratch of the quill where Howland had hesitated before writing a name that had lived and lived in both of them all these years, while silence grew thick as moss around it. There had been a ledger. Howland said he had thought it was a birth record or a list of tithes when he first saw it in the sept of a village at the foot of a mountain that no longer had its tower. The holy brother who had kept it had died with a smile on his blue lips and a rosary tangled in his fingers, fallen in the snow with a basket of dried fig and almond meant for the poor. The ledger, swollen with damp, had pages stuck together like old scabs. They had pulled them apart by the brazier in an inn whose roof leaked, and Howland had the patience of a man who could sit in reeds for hours without a ripple. He had traced with a knife point the ridges where ink had bled, and there like a bird's footprint was the remnant of a seal, and there the florid hand of a septon who had prided himself on his letters. Witnesses named, forms kept, vows spoken under 7 aspects, and 2 names in a line that shook something inside Ned's ribs as if a harp string had been plucked and would never stop. There were more than names. There was the shape of a day, the count of candles burned, the hour before dawn when the vows had been said, the veil a crown's prince had lifted, the kiss that had sealed what swords would later follow. He had taken the letter to his heart. Now in the God's Wood, Ned pressed his lips together to keep the past from spilling out as his breath. His sister had died with his name on her mouth, and it had not been his name, not truly. She had been speaking to the boy whose breath had caught and wailed in the dark chamber where the scent of blood and crushed flowers had hung heavy and sweet, almost sickening. He remembered his hands as a much younger man, how steady they had been even though they felt soaked through, and the babe's head slick as an oiled stone. The woman who had kept the room had been Dornish, with long, deft fingers that could braid hair in moments and tie off a cut with silk thread that would not pull. There had been 3 swords on the floor when he left the tower, and Howland breathing like a man who had drowned and was learning it again. He could not keep it secret any longer. Not with the air in the red keep so thick with the scent of lies that it made his eyes water. Not with the king drinking himself toward a stag's stupidity. Not with that woman looking at him from behind her lashes and guile, as if she had already counted every step he would take. The truth was a sword, and he had kept it in its scabbard, oiled and hidden. To draw it now would cut deep. It would cut him, too. But the realm had begun to sleep like a man in a burning house. He had thought once that it was kindness to let it dream a little longer. He folded the letter and tucked it back inside his shirt. To one side of the grove, the wall showed where roots had pushed stones apart. He could see a shard of moon through an arch of green. The city was a distant would-be woman beyond the wall, hips and shoulder blades and soft sighing down among the alleys where the heat pooled. He stood, and his knees felt the year, as he had carried. When he turned, there was someone in the shadow by the laurels. For a moment the shape might have been a column where the leaves were trimmed to a spinster's cone. But then it breathed, and the air around it shifted with a cloying perfume of powder and lemon and something else, a faint smell of silk kept too long by moths. "My lord Hand," came the voice. "The gods do not answer, but they listen. Those who have time to pray to them must be grateful for any ear." "Varys," Ned said, and his voice did not change. "I would prefer to be alone." Men who prefer to be alone rarely get their preference here. The eunuch moved nearer without any rustling. The stones of the path were laid soft and flat for feet like his. "What troubles plow your brow, my lord? If they are weeds, I could name them. If they are flowers, I would advise a different garden." "Do you follow me for sport?" Ned asked. "Or is this your duty to a friend?" Varys's head tilted bird-like. Even in that dimness Ned could see the gleam of his eyes, set like two wet buttons in the round moon of his face. "I owe my friends little and my city everything, Lord Stark. I take my station seriously. There is a great draft moving through the kingdom. Doors that used to be latched are rattling. Your lordship's Northman ears might tell you that wind smells of winter. I have always said so." Ned rested a hand on the top of the old stump as if it were the hilt of a familiar thing. "If you have come to tell me tales, tell them. I would tell you there are ears in the walls of the castle, and not all of them serve me." Varys's hands unfolded like pieces of silk. "The king hunts tomorrow if the wine does not hunt him first. I have always found it unfortunate when men who should be needed are lost because boars do not recognize the value of their flesh." "Tomorrow is not yet come," Ned said. "Do not whisper misfortune into its mouth." "As you wish." A pause. Then, "You have had a letter." Ned did not move, but a muscle in his jaw did. "From many places. This one flew a long way to find your hand." Varys's tone grew soft. "You are a careful man. There are those who mistake that for slowness. I have never been of that number. If you had any respect for what is careful, you would leave me to it," Ned said. "Is this your way of telling me that what I intend to do will be watched?" "It is my way of telling you that there are times when the truth is a torch and all the world is dry tinder." Varys's perfume seemed all at once sickly sweet, like a pastry that had gone to honey in the sun. "Be sparing, my lord Hand. A single spark is enough." Ned let out a breath through his nose. "Good night, Lord Varys." The eunuch inclined his head, shaped as always to the person he was speaking to, the room he inhabited. "Good night." Then he was gone, or at least the sound of him was gone, and if a shadow lingered beneath the laurel, it belonged to the tree. Ned left the God's Wood the way he had come and climbed back through the waking belly of the fortress. A serving boy slept against a kitchen door, mouth open, fish breath. A cat with a chunk missing from one ear stared up at him with yellow contempt and rubbed its flank against his boot, then trotted away, tail lofted like a banner. In his chamber, he lit a candle and held the letter above it for a heartbeat before he snuffed the flame. He did not sleep. He sat by the window where the breeze moved the curtain as if a careful hand were stirring a cloth that had been washed too many times. He watched the moon in ripples of black water far below and felt every bit of the south press against his skin. When the first light came, pale and unreliable, he stood. Robert Baratheon had always been a man that morning did poorly by. He slept the sleep of those who outrun their sorrows and wake only when they are sure they have enough lead. At this hour he would be half drowned in barley beer's dregs and the perfume of some girl whose father would sell his good name if the king asked him. Ned did not go to Robert's chamber. He went to Ser Barristan instead. He found the Lord Commander in his white cloak that looked less like cloth and more like a sheet of the old vows themselves, the kind of thing that would not accept dirt. Selmy stood with his back to the sunrise at the yard's edge, watching two boys beat at one another with willow sticks while their masters barked correction. His hair was like milk, his face weathered leather. He gave as much attention to a pair of boys as he would have to a court of peers. When he turned to see who came, Ned saw how age had only sharpened him. "Lord Stark," Ser Barristan said, "you are up early."
"Iema, si."
The old knight regarded him. "It is not common to find a northerner eager for our eastern sun." "It rises all the same," Ned said. "I need the king. Many men need him." A faint smile, a dry thing. "Fewer get him." "This morning," Ned said. "I must be one of the fewer." Ser Barristan studied him for a heartbeat and looked past him to the castle where a flock of pigeons sprang up in fright from a roof's edge as a tower hawk came sliding low over the tiles. "I will wake him," he said. "Wait in his solar, and I will bring him to you with as small an army as can manage it." Robert came half-dressed, a heavy robe thrown over a chest that had once been a thing you could hang a kingdom on and now was a barrel. His face was puffed where the night had had its way with him. He was still handsome in the way of men who do not know how to be otherwise. The sight of Ned's solemnity sobered him further than the wash water and the cold air of the corridor had done. He tossed himself into a chair and sent wine sloshing from the flagon he appended into a cup. "Well," he said without greeting, "I see that look. Something sits on you. Spit it out before it takes root." Ned did not sit. He felt the letter like a burn against his skin. "You know I do not me to you in the morning with small things. I know you come to me too little." Robert swillied the wine but did not drink yet. "Gods, Ned, I liked you better before you took that cloak off your heart and put another on your shoulders." He stared at the window as if he might talk himself into some other day. "Say your piece." "I need you sober," Ned said. Robert's eyes slid to him. "So it is a grave matter." "It is," Ned said, "and there are few men I would trust with it. Fewer still I would trust to make the right choice when they heard it." Robert set the cup down. It made a small click that seemed to echo. "Is this politics, then? Some question of that bitch's little lion brood? Tell me which of them has been biting at you and I will have their teeth out." "It is about your children," Ned said, and Robert's eyes flinched. "And it is about mine." Slowly the king stood. He did it with effort but also with something like the weight of the years between them, as if he were standing up not just to show height but to stand again on that ford where the river had been red and a prince had fallen like a ring of mail torn loose. "If this is some Northman sermon, spare me. If this is some husband scolding, spare me too." He moved closer. "What do you want to say?" Ned reached inside his shirt and took out the letter. He did not hand it to Robert. He did not want that words to fly from hand to hand like crows. "I took a bastard back to Winterfell after the war," he said. "I named him John and claimed him as mine. I did not do it lightly. You asked me once whose boy he was, and I told you to ask me no more." Robert's mouth twisted with impatience. "Must I hear again the tale I have heard 1,000 times? You found a woman on your way north. You did the thing that men do, your good wife forgave you. The end of it." "No," Ned shook his head. "There is more. I have kept it because I thought to keep the boy alive. I think now that to keep it longer is to put him in danger, and not only him." He stepped to the table and laid the letter down. He did not let go. "The boy is not mine by blood." Robert made a sound that could have been a laugh and could have been a bark. "So some other fool sowed and you took the harvest? Why should I?" "He is Lyanna's." The room swallowed the name. "He is hers, Robert. He was born in a tower while she lay dying. I was there to take him into my hands." Robert had never been a man to hold silence long, but the silence he held then was not his to let go. It was the kind that falls when a door opens onto a room you did not know was in your own house and you see, not the thing you expected, but a shape that tells you how wrong you have been. His eyes went to the letter and away, to Ned's face and away, to a place behind Ned's shoulder where none of this was happening. When he spoke, the words had to work themselves up through something. "You tell me this after 15 years. I tell you now because I have proof beyond my word," Ned said. "And because I can no longer keep the truth without it turning corrupt inside me. I thought if I spoke, you would kill him. I think now that if I do not speak, someone else will, and then he dies with your wrath upon him and mine for having lied to you in the balance." "Kill him?" Robert said softly, and the words were flat, as if he were tasting them and finding them old. He took a breath that shook a little. "You think this is what I am, do you, Ned?" "I think you are my friend," Ned said, "and that you loved my sister." Robert's laugh this time was raw, like a sore scraped open. He turned away from Ned and moved to the window and gripped the sill and looked out at a city he did not govern so much as preside over while it made its calculations without him. He was silent long enough for the feathering of pigeons on the roof opposite to become a sound you could name. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. "Who is the father?" "Rhaegar," Ned said. "There was a marriage. It was done in secret, but it was done. My sister was not stolen. She left, and when she died she asked me for one thing with the last strength she had. I have kept that thing as carefully as I kept her. The boy lived at my hearth, so no one would put a knife to him in my name." Robert's head bowed so far that the cords in the back of his neck stood up. His fingers whitened on the sill. "A marriage," he said hoarsely. "In my realm, to the man I killed." He turned back. His face had become something harder than rage and softer than grief. He looked as if he had found himself in the past and did not know what to do with the man there. "You protected him from me. I protected him from the world," Ned said. "But yes, from you too. When you spoke of Targaryens, you spoke with one voice, whether they were babes or men with swords. I do not deny it." Robert's mouth tightened. "How do I know your proof is not some forgery? Paper and wax are tame. They can be taught tricks." "Because I give you the name of the man who saw it kept," Ned said. "And if you do not believe me, you may send your own men to pull up the stones where the tower stood and find the bones buried there, yours, mine, and 3 who wore white cloaks. You may ask Howland Reed if he ever lies. You may read a ledger that was written before any of us imagined this morning when we stand here speaking like this. Ser Barristan knows the honor of his dead. He can tell you what sort of vows are witnessed and what kind are not." Robert stared at him as if trying to see through the years. "The boy is at the wall," he said. "He is," Ned said, "which keeps him from the hands of men who would use him, and from crowns, and from the kind of death that comes with crowns. It does not protect him from knives if knives find him because of what he is." "And what do you plan to do with this truth, my learned Lord Hand?" Robert's gesture took in the room, the castle, the morning beyond it. "Do you mean to tell the realm I have kept a prince's brat breathing all my reign? Do you mean to drag a boy from the wall and give him a throne? Light 1,000 bonfires for the old wars so we can warm our hands on them again? I mean to make you choose with your eyes open," Ned said. "You have children here whose hair shows me more than your bedchamber could. You have an heir a mother has sharpened like a dagger. You have a brother you sneer at who reads laws while you drink. You have a realm that is beginning to hear cold whispers from the north, and a woman across the sea with a belly that may in time bear dragons if old songs have any truth in them. I do not want a war for your chair. I want you to understand where the ground is so you do not step into a pit while you are laughing at some lewd tale." He allowed himself a breath. "I want you to think of my sister, and whether she would have me hold my tongue any longer." Robert looked more lost than any man in a crown ever wants to look. He rubbed his face with a hand that had knuckles like stones and rings that had cut men's lips when he struck them. Then he did something with his mouth that might have been the intention of a smile, bent and sad. "You have always been the only man in this city to make me feel like a boy. Drown the damned wine. I need air." They went to the eastern ramparts where the breeze off the bay was cleanest. Seabirds wheeled and shouted as if they were also arguing about what truth to believe. The guard at the post turned and stared and remembered to look away. "Say I believe you," Robert said at last, speaking into the wind. "Say there was a marriage. Say the boy is hers and not yours. Say I have been a fool in more ways than I care to count. What then? Then, Ned said, we keep him where he is. He swore vows there, and I will not break them for him. We bring to heal those who think themselves above your law. We look to the north and to the wall with more than old men and poachers. We call Stannis to the city and make him your hand with the authority you were too proud to give him. We put away wine for a month and think. You keep your children safe by telling truth you can bear to tell. Not all of it. Enough of it. Robert snorted. You think I can tell the realm that the cubs are lions and not stags? You think I can tell them my line ends with me and watch the kingdoms choose? Do you think I can strangle my wife with words and live after? I think you can look at your blood and know what it is not, Ned said. Then you can decide which danger you can live with, but not while we all pretend the world is some other shape. Robert was silent a long time. He leaned his elbows on the rampart as if he would fall forward into the sea and go down where no one would call him king. I hate him, he said finally, so softly Ned barely heard. I have hated him each day I had breath, and the days my breath stank of ale and horse sweat I hated him more, because he was not there to see what he had made of me. I do not hate your boy. I do not know him. Perhaps I would if he stood before me. I do not know. Gods know. He blew out air. Send for Stannis. And send for, no, not Renly. Varys can carry slop to that peacock. Let him stay where he oils himself. Bring me Stannis. We will speak of law. We will speak of ships. And we will not hunt today. It was a small sentence, almost careless. It went down the morning with the pigeons and the hawk and the sound of ropes creaking against masts. Ned did not smile. He did not close his eyes in relief. But something, taut and dangerous in his chest, eased its two hands a little, enough to let him breathe deeper. He thought of a boar in the Kingswood rooting through bracken and not finding a man who would bleed for days while a queen sharpened quills and a boy studied how a power might be worn like a new cloak. He thought of Jon, and Ghost's pink eyes in winter light, and snow blowing across the old stones of a castle that remembered kings only as cold whispers. There were many rooms yet in the house of that day. Cersei would hear now what she had not expected to hear. She would knee-lace the truth and make it look like a lie and show it to men who wanted to see it. She would send ravens that said nothing and meant everything. Ser Jaime would laugh and then grow, if not frightened, then vigilant in the way of a man who feels the table tilt under him. Varys would go whisper to Littlefinger, and Littlefinger would smile as if he had diced his own name and could throw it any way he pleased. Pycelle would blink his watery old eyes and smell of stale mint and leave behind him strings of phlegm and platitudes. That was a different part of the day. For now Ned went back to his rooms and wrote 3 letters. One to Stannis. One to Howland Reed that said only a thing that marshmen would understand. The fish has left the net and swims in a river with higher banks. One to the wall. At Castle Black the wind was a physical thing. It shoved and worried and found its way into the tiniest of gaps as if it carried 1,000 hands, each with a different curiosity. Jon had learned to tie his cloak until it sat on him like skin. He had learned where the steps iced over most quickly and how to test with the heel of his boot before putting his weight down. He had learned that some of the old men were animated by habit more than blood, and that the young were kept moving by resentment and pride. He had learned to watch men who had once taken coins from any hand and now sat under vows like dogs trying to keep their paws still. He had learned that being better at anything than someone else made no friends when that someone was a boy who had never been best at anything. This morning the light lay thin as skimmed milk over the yard, and the ravens watched from their perches with heads cocked and eyes like onyx chips. Jon had woken before the shout and dressed in the dark by the shape of his own things.
Gostv.
As a white smudge beside his bed until he was not. Out in the yard the swordmaster had them at the post striking the same cut again and again until the shoulders burned. Sam Tarly was breathing as if he had run uphill. He had grace for no sport but kindness. When their arms were trembling, Ser Alliser stalked among them and said something about the North's whelps who thought a name like Stark was a blade in itself. Jon had learned to keep his face as smooth as water when leaves fall on it. Inside he imagined a room to put such words in, and he closed the door behind them. The bird came down out of the white mid-morning like a piece of the sky that had changed its mind. Jon did not see it first. He saw the fast-moving shadow that went across the stone and made a boy flinch as if struck. A cry went up. "Raven!" As if anyone here could be surprised by a raven. They watched them as others watch weather. Maester Aemon's boy moved toward the rookery with a basket as if he were going to market. The bird turned once around the yard and came down and landed with a hop and a crooked bow-legged dignity that was comic in such a dark thing. Jon's eyes went to it and away, because if he let hope see out of them, men would guess at things he kept for himself. Later, after the meal, when the broth had not taken the feeling out of his fingers and the bread had not been enough bread, the summons came. The boy with the basket stood awkwardly in the door of the hall and said Jon Snow's name as if it were stuck to his tongue. Jon went with him. Ghost trotted close, head low, tail level, as if the corridors were a forest with prey about to spring. In the Maester's tower, the warmth was real. A brazier glowed with more than practical heat. It was the kind of warmth men brought together out of respect for an old man who could not keep his bones from complaining. The smell was different too, old parchment, sour and sweetened by dried herbs crushed with mortar and pestle. The ravens muttered among their own black congress. Maester Aemon was less a man than a patient flame. His eyes were a clouded thing. He kept them on voices rather than faces and found his way toward words as a blind man finds his way across a room he knows, by counting and the warmth of the fire. He smiled when Jon entered. His mouth did the work that his eyes could not. "Jon, come, warm your hands. I have a letter for you and for me," he said, and then with a little tilt of his head as if listening beyond the door. "And for another who will not read it." "My lord," Jon said, and could not keep the hope out of the boy's word. "For Lord Commander Mormont," Aemon said. "Sit. The world sifts itself. We are only husks if we do not catch what falls." He put the parchment in Jon's hands first. It was a small thing to feel, given what it held. Jon had always known his father's hand. The square, honest letters. The way his words wore the simplest clothes they could. This was that hand. He read words about the weather, about ghosts that did not have ghosts' fur and breath, about knowing the value of silence and the danger of it too. There was a sentence that did not say what it said. When a secret weighs the scale, a man must consider which way he tilts it, or the scale will tilt him. Jon read it twice, and then a third time because the ache it made inside him was something he did not want to interrupt. He looked up and found Maester Aemon's gaze turned toward him, not with the exactness a sighted man gives but with an old sympathy that seemed sharper than vision. "Is there more?" Jon asked. "Another letter?" "There is more." Aemon tapped the folded parchment in his lap with a finger so narrow it looked like the bone's lantern with the candle burned down very far. "Here is what your lord father writes me." He did not invite Jon to read that one. He had never needed to tell Jon what was not for him. He read some parts aloud. "Counsel, the work of one old man to another across a gap that was not so wide between them as it might look." Then he folded the words back into their skin and sat quiet a long moment. "I have lived longer than is decent," he said. "This is not the worst river to stand beside, Jon. This is not the worst letter. But it has weight. Do you feel it?" "Yes," Jon said, and found that his hands had closed, making of the parchment a thing he might fight with. He opened them quickly, trembling a little so it would not crease. Is it about me?" "It is about many men," Aemon said gently. "It is about an old summer that is ending, and a winter that has not yet begun. It is about kings that are and kings that are not. It is about a promise to a dying girl, and the cost of it." Jon's heart jumped with a wolf's sudden startle. The room felt smaller. "Who? Sometimes I am cruel without intending it." Aemon's mouth thinned. "I will not be cruel today. You have enough to carry. You will carry more. For now carry this. The Lord Commander will be told that the South is listening to the North. Men will come. Grain will come. Fire and iron will come. That is more than we could have hoped for yesterday." He leaned his head back as if the thread that held it had been pulled. "Go to your duties. Bring me your questions tomorrow and the next day and the next. The letter is yours, Jon. Keep it, as you keep everything you have been given." Ghost put his head under Jon's palm and exhaled. Jon went out into the cold with the letter a thin heat against him. Far south, in a room where the light came filtered through a curtain of yellow silk and took on the color of old honey, Cersei Lannister stood with her arms folded and regarded herself in a polished piece of Myrish glass. She had been a girl who liked to look. Age had not made her less so. She saw the line at one corner of her mouth that the last year had cut with the tip of its knife. She saw the pale of her hair pulled back like a wreath, and the green in her eyes that had made a though. Usen men think themselves brave and twice as many foolish. Her maid's hands moved in the material of her gown, straightening, placing, lifting, until Cersei flicked them away. "You sent the note," she said. "It went to father?" "Yes, your grace." The maid did not meet her eyes. "The raven will fly better in this wind than in last night's. And to..." Cersei made a face, a little twist as if something sour had come into her mouth. "To my brother?" Ser Jaime was at Ser Adam's rooms. He was not alone. They said they would see he received your grace's words. She could hear her heart. It made fists against her ribs. "The king will not hunt today," she said to the room. "He means to be sober, then. He means to look like a man who has not drunk himself raw." The maid said nothing. Cersei moved to the window and looked down at a garden where a fountain did not manage coolness but pushed heat back with defiance. "He has found himself again in that northern fool. I should have drowned that man in a bowl of soup when I had the chance." Her fingers tightened on the cloth. "No, that is not true. I would not soil my hands so. I would have wiped my hands on someone else's dress." She smiled at her reflection because it pleased her to see herself smile. She knew what was being said in rooms beyond hers. She felt the shift in the keep as a woman feels a change in the child she carries. She had walked these corridors enough to know when they echoed differently. Truth had entered them like a thief with soft shoes. She would have to make sure it triped. She went to Joffrey. He was in his chamber with the hound, listening to the man's coarse voice tell a story of killing that had more truth in it than any poem. Joffrey was beautiful. He had a face like one of the minor gods carved in the seps of rich cities, the kind you gild fully and set in niches to catch lamplight. Beauty had not made him kinder. He looked up at her and smiled, and it was as if a blade had been drawn in the room. "Mother," he said, "what does the king do today?" "He does not hunt," Cersei said. "He plays at being king." Joffrey looked past her at the hound, who looked at nothing he was not paid to look at, then back. "Then we will play at being heirs. I would like to ride. I would like to ride through the fish market and knock mongers' baskets over." Their eyes popped so marvelously. "You will not ride," Cersei said. "You will stay close. There are cats in this castle that eat meat as lovely as you and lick their whiskers so no one sees the blood on them. Smile sweetly when you meet Lord Stark this morning. Call him my lord, in such a way he hears what you mean. Watch that girl of his when she thinks no one sees her. She is not a snake. She is a bird, and birds tell the sky what the world is. Then stay with your books in the afternoon. It is a day for showing diligence." Joffrey made a face. The hound's mouth twitched as if it might smile and thought better. Cersei put a hand on her son's hair and smoothed it and let herself feel the silk of it. She had not been made to love the way other women were, but she loved this, her own bright echo. She would not let anyone turn him into a story to be told after supper. On the east road that led away from Dragonstone, a rider with the stag sigil in his pouch changed horses at a post station and went on without drinking. Stannis Baratheon, reading at a table in a chamber whose only adornment was neatness, lifted his head when the hooves came like a roll of drum across the stones. He opened the letter without ceremony and read it twice. On his face nothing moved that did not serve thought. He rose and went to the window. The sky over the narrow sea had the color of new iron. His jaw moved once, as if he had cracked a seed and found the kernel as bitter as he expected. He returned to his table and sat and reached for a fresh sheet of parchment with the same care he might give a blade. holding it at the right place so he would not cut himself. He put his words where they belonged. He permitted himself the smallest of grim satisfactions. Law was a net. He had tried to throw it many times and the fish had been too strong or the net too thin. Now someone had given him weight. He had always said that weight was what Law lacked here, men to hold it. He wrote to his fiancée the sea, to his ships, to his captains who did not love him but obeyed him. He wrote to his brother and did not call him a fool, because he had learned a kind of thrift with that word. He wrote to his conscience, which spoke not with a lady's voice but with a clerk's exacting pen. Do not go to war for a chair when there is a cold hole in the world that needs boards laid over it. The small council chamber that afternoon did not feel small, felt crowded with things unsaid. Peter Baelish leaned back in his chair and showed his throat when he laughed while showing nothing else. Varys wore lavender and a face like an empty plate where any expression could be painted. Pycelle rumbled and rustled. Renly arranged his cuffs as if they were banners on a tilt field. Ned saw all of them as one sees men in a dream. He kept his eyes on the king. "We will go to the wall," Robert said. "Not this moment, but soon. I will go myself. There are old songs I would see and men I would shame. I am told they make a sport they're called eating, and I would see if I can learn it among them. We will send men and grain now, and we will have Stannis count the bags and the bodies because he is a sour man and will not lie to me with a smile." "Your Grace," Renly began, half amusement and half protest. "Shut your sweet mouth, little brother," Robert said without heat. "I feel like a man who has eaten too much cheese and woken with his tongue furred. I require sour to clean it." "Of course," Varys murmured, and his eyes were all sympathy. "The realm will be reassured to hear you think of their bellies. The realm will do what I tell it, Robe," Artie said and looked at Ned. "What else, my hand? You have that look again. I would know the next thing so I can hate it properly." Ned did not let his voice catch. "Your Grace," he said, "we must speak with the Queen in private, and with your children." The ripple that went through them was a clever thing. It went down the table and along the wall and up into the rafters and took the dust with it. Peter's eyes widened in the perfect measure of a man feigning surprise at a play whose lines he wrote. Varys's lips shaped the sound "ah" without letting it out. Renly's hand stopped in its preening. Pycelle discovered a hair in his beard that needed stroking into the correct place. Robert let out a sigh that was almost a groan. "I suppose we must." He rubbed his face. "After supper, I will have my meat first. If I must swallow poison later, I will do it on a full stomach." When the supper had been eaten and the last bones cleared and the last flagon set down with a sound that said they had not emptied it entirely, they went to a smaller chamber where tapestries of forests did their best to make Southron would look like the north. Cersei came with her white smile on. The children came at a distance. Sansa Stark, pale-cheeked and full of the posture that comes from being watched, and Arya with her hair refusing to stay where it was put and her eyes that took in everything as if she would make use of it later, and Joffrey with his little air of the thing he had been told he was, and Tommen beside him like a soft echo, and Myrcella sweet and wary with a lady's training grown fragile roots in shallow soil. The Hound was a black shadow near the door, and Ser Jaime behind the Queen, splendid with an effortlessness that had cost other men their ease. Robert said what he had to say. He did it with words that had settled into him. He did not stumble. He said there were questions of blood that must be asked. He said there would be men who would be cruel with their tongues and men who would lie to please. He said he was tired of the board being set by people who had names for their moves and none of those names was truth. He said he wanted something for the realm that did not taste of old meat in a new dish. He did not say everything. He did not say marriage. He did not say Targaryen. He did not say Jon. He did not say perhaps my firstborn is not. He did not say perhaps I am walking on a floor with no planks left. Cersei listened, and what she heard she did not show. She was gracious, and balked and questioned, and agreed, and when she agreed the way her throat moved made men think she had been generous. She brought the talk to Sansa, to Arya, to the idea of duty that could be trimmed to fit like couture. She held Joffrey's hand in hers and the boy bore it as if it were beneath him and a pleasure both. She left the room like a woman who had entertained a polite guest and was already giving orders to servants to air the sheets. When she was gone, Robert sat down as if he had been keeping himself upright for show. Ned stood and felt much older than he had that morning. Sansa had cried in the soft, ashamed way of girls who have seen something suddenly before they were given the words for it. Arya had taken her sister's wet hand in her dry one without looking at her, and then looked at her father with a gaze that said she had known all along that the floorboards would be counted. Joffrey had bowed and smiled, and his eyes had not moved like a boy's. They had slid like an eel's to the places where the useful corners were. Tommen had looked at a tapestry as if it would show him a rabbit to chase. That night Ned went alone again to the Godswood. Varys did not join him. The weirwood stump lay like an old king's skull, polished by subjects who were never going to bow again. He took the letter out and burned it finally, folded not to be read again, so that the ash of a secret went up into a sky that carried all the words ever spoken and lost them and did not care. He watched until the last corner turned from black to red and red to ash and blew away. He had thought he would feel lighter then. He did not. He felt like a man with a pack who had shifted its weight from one shoulder to the other and found it was a little better and would make his bones ache in a different place. The next days were made up of small decisions that were not small. Grain was ordered north. Men who had been told their service was with brothels and bribes were told now it was with sacks and wagons, and they did not cheer. The old smithies of the city began to hammer in earnest, as if a winter had set the metals tempered differently. Stannis came, smelling of tar and sea salt and something harder than both. He bowed like a board, said he would bow as a board, and then set his jaw in that way that made lesser men itch with the desire to run impulsively away and do something foolish so they would not have to listen to him. Ser Barristan grew more grave with satisfaction than any man had a right to be when he was only doing what vows asked of him. Renly laughed softly and wrote letters with hands that did not tire. Varys came and went and told them what men said in the kitchens and washing courts and at the end of keys. Littlefinger smiled and made numbers behave like servants who gave the right answers. In the north a wind blew that the south did not feel because it was too caught up in its own heat. Farmers in a dozen villages woke to ice in the buckets before they had expected it. In the lands between the wall and the haunted forest, something moved that was not the wind. Men saw shapes at night on the snow that did not leave the right kind of track. Those who were old enough to remember stories did not tell them in the common hall where boys would laugh and the fire would turn the word civilized. They told them to men who had altogether too many new things to put into their heads. On the third day, a raven came from the Iron Islands that said nothing anyone liked, and a messenger from Sunspear with a message that looked courteous and smelled like a pit of vipers, and a letter from Old Town about a candle that had burned where no one had lit it and no one clever had guessed whether it had been tongues or wick. On the fourth day, before the council rose, a septon from the Stormlands arrived to kneel and announced that he had known a man who had known a brother who had served at a sept in Dorne and had a ledger that recorded a thing he had never before thought anyone might pay for. "Bring him," Robert said. He held on to his temper with his hand as a man holds his bladder on a long ride. "Bring any of them. Bring me papers and bones and men who can remember the right number of candles. Bring me the tower's stones and I will count the dust." Ned thought of the tower. He thought of Arthur Dayne's blade, pale as moonlight and as hard. He thought of Howland's spear and the wet grass and their breaths turning into ghosts and rushing away from their mouths. He had tried not to think of it too much these last days. That morning in the Godswood had called it up like a debt. He went to the yard. The noon heat had not yet crushed the day. Men moved through their forms with pikes and bows and wooden swords. Arya was among them, with the sword the Braavosi had given her, making little delicate cuts with a care that did not look like a child's. She saw him and came as if drawn by a string she had not decided to cut yet. Her face was smudged with dust and her hair had given up entirely. She scowled up at him and loved him with her eyes. "I heard you are sending things north," she said without preface. "I am." Ned's mouth turned. "Grain, men. A smith with more patience than is healthy." She nodded as if she had been expecting to be told something more and was polite enough not to demand it. "Are we going home?" "We will," he said. "Not today." "Sansa said we will not," Arya said darkly. She says you will marry her to a prince with a sweet mouth and iron hands, and she will sit on a chair with her skirts in the right shape and forget what the river smells like. She is stupid. She is your sister, Ned said. Do not call your sister stupid. She is, Arya said, and then looked guilty for half a heartbeat. Sometimes. You will not say it when you are old, Ned said. You will be like your mother and tell yourselves you always loved each other, and it will be partly true and partly something you decide to believe because it makes you both able to sit at table without kicking. Arya made a face. Do I have to be like mother? No one has to be like anyone else, Ned said. The world does that to us without help. Be what you are. Set your feet. You will need them under you. She squinted at him. You talk like the water dancer.
Doi.
Ned said. He seems to have had some schooling. Remember your lessons. That night, in Lord Commander Mormont's chamber, the fire burned hot as pride. The old bear sat with his jaw in his beard and his hand on the arm of the chair, as if he would not let it go until the day he died. He listened while Jon read parts of the letter aloud and while Maester Aemon read in a voice that sounded like a bow being drawn. He grunted when he heard of grain and men. He grunted again when he heard of the king himself spending nights without a cup. We will take what we get, he said, and send back what is owed. Send back words that will make better words follow. Ravens have their work cut out, Aemon said, and smiled as if he were amused by the thought of birds flying to exhaustion under the weight of sentences. I will let them rest at Moat Cailin if they ask me for it. Jon stood with Ghost at his thigh, listening and not listening. The room seemed too small for the thought he was trying not to think. It had words in it like prince and marriage that were not actually in the room. He felt them brush his cheek and ducked like a boy avoids a thrown apple. He thought of his father. No, he thought of Lord Eddard, and then stopped himself and called him father again, because whatever else men would say, he was the man who had put bread and salt and strictness and care in front of him all his life. He thought of a woman he had never known, whose brother had kept her like a fire you keep covered because the night is full of thieves. He thought of blue flowers he had never smelled and found his throat hurt as if he had been running. He went down to the yard after and found Sam, and they walked along the inner edge of the wall where the wind reaches the dead end and does not know what to do with itself. Do you ever think you could be more than you are? Jon asked, and felt foolish as soon as he heard his own voice. I think I could be less, Sam said at once. I think that often. I think I will be less if I am lucky. My father tried to make me more until I learned to be less. He peered at Jon. Does that help? Not very much, Jon said, and then he laughed because it was either laugh or go and put his head against the cold stone until the pain in it had some company. In the Red Keep, there came a night when Robert went to the Queen's Tower like a man climbing his own gallows. Cersei received him with such grace that he felt sick with it. They spoke. There are ways to say what must be said without the words themselves ever being in the room. He did not mention gold hair, or the way a gardener knows whose apple tree is whose when he looks at the fruit. He did not mention brothers. He did not mention fathers in their male. He did not mention the way a woman's mouth can form the shape of refusal and acceptance with the same lips. They walked among phrases like the good of the realm and appearances and our children and my patience and your temper, and she looked at him in a way that made him leave feeling as if he had been put in storeroom where he could not harm anyone for a while.
Petyr Baelish, said he.
And his tower and counted what he owned. He owned little by the measure of men who counted by land and steel. He owned much by the measure of men who counted by tears and small movements of hands toward coin. He turned the whole picture in his head and found the angles. He set new chalk marks on his board. Truth moved like a piece he could not see the bottom of. He would not knock it over too quickly. He was not a fool. He smiled to himself. Fools struck the board when they were angry and then claimed their sleeves had done it. Varys went to the kitchens and sat under the ears in the walls and listened to women speak of the hand that had touched them with respect and to other women speak of the one who had grabbed as he would grab a goose. He watched boys with their own soft malice and girls with hair that would not stay. He took his powder and his silks and made himself into a woman once and a fat guardsman once and a washerwoman once and listened to what men said when they thought they were alone. He took what Ned Stark had done and wrapped it carefully. He would use it in time. For now, he needed it not to bruise. Tywin Lannister, miles and mountains away, read a letter and did not change his face. He did not need to change it. Men would carry it away if it wore a different expression and do things with it that he would not like. He sat alone and thought what he would do if he were the truth coming to a table where men had knives. He did not love many things. He loved order. Order could be bought with fear. Sometimes it could be bought with marriage. He thought of his daughter as a chessman he had set years ago, and that was now at risk of being knocked by a drunk player. He thought of his sons in a way that did him no credit. He thought of the way winter might save him some trouble and give him other kinds. He closed his eyes and saw the river of gold his house had built itself on. He did not imagine it running cold. He would not allow that. On the wall the wind changed again, subtly, the way a horse changes its gait without you asking it if it knows the road better than you. Jon woke in the night with a feeling he could not name and went out on the wall walk. Ghost went with him. The ice was lit green by a moon that had got lost and found itself on the wrong side of a cloud. He looked north and felt something there that was not a sight. It was something that had no weight and all the weight at once. Ghost's ears pricked. The wolf's silence was a kind of speech. They stood together and Jon felt his heart slow to the rhythm of the thing he could not hear. It would continue. That much was certain even when nothing else was. The south would shift and hiss and threaten to bite itself. The queen would not lie down. The king would try to stand up more often and find his own spine. Stannis would measure, count, order, and be hated for it. Renly would preen and plan in smaller wars. The Lannisters would tuck knives in their garters and smile at dinners. The girls would learn more than they should have to learn. The boy at the wall would hold two names in his chest like two breaths. He could not let go because letting one go would make the other stop too. But that first morning had been a stone thrown in a lake. The circles moved outward invisibly as well as where the eye could see them, and on the bottom old things woke and turned over once and settled again, wary, taking stock of what had disturbed them. The fifth day brought rain. It ran down the stone faces of towers and dripped from the points of gargoyles' mouths like spittle. It softened the air so that voices seemed greased in it. Ned walked the passages and felt the keep as a living thing. Men gave him room without knowing they did. He paused at an open arch where he could see the sea, gray as hammered lead. He thought of Winterfell in rain, when the water runs clean and full off the slate roofs and the earth rejoices. He thought of a small boy with black hair and a presence to him even when he pretended to be no one, and he thought of a girl who had laughed at him for having too solemn a brow and who had died holding his hand, and he thought of that too, the way it had been to hold a hand that was growing colder and pretend it was not, and he closed his eyes and did not say anything aloud because you did not need to say anything to those who had earned your silence. When he opened them, Ser Barristan stood beside him, the rain on his white cloak like tears it did not admit to. "My lord," the old knight said quietly, "it is not my place, but I will say this and be damned to it. You have done a hard thing. I have stood before kings who did easy things. I remember those kings' names less." Ned inclined his head. "You stood before a prince once?" he said, and felt the old blade come out of the scabbard between them. "I did." Selmy's gaze held the sea. "He died as well as men can praise the art of dying. There was, I think, more to him than my vows asked me to see." He drew a breath. "The boy at the wall will not be rung for in this castle, but my prayers go sometimes not to the gods we name, but to the qualities we forget we need. Courage, forbearance, clarity. I shall ask those to watch over him." "Thank you," Ned said. He did not know if he was grateful to Selmy for saying it or for not saying something else. In another part of the castle Arya stalked a cat across a run of barrels, arms out, bare feet silent. She had learned to move through this place as if it were a forest of a new kind. She had learned to avoid the men who took joy from bumping a small shoulder with their hips to prove size. She had learned to see where men hid themselves with their backs to her. She had learned that everyone left something lying around that mattered to someone else. The cat looked at her and flicked its tail, 1, 2, 3, counting down to a bolt. She smiled and moved faster than a child has a right to move. She was almost there when a man stepped out of a door, muttering as if to himself, and she had to put both hands on the barrel to keep from falling into him. He was tall and wore a black cloak of thick cloth made thinner by much use. His hair was the color of wet straw, and his face had the kind of handsomeness that women in villages mistake for goodness from a distance and that looks raw up close. "Beg pardon," he said without looking at her, because he did not see her. He saw the cat's tail vanish under a cart. He saw the wall beyond. He saw his own name in a list he was carrying in his head. Arya moved past him like water around a post. She was gone. The man stood for a moment and then went on. He was not a cat or a girl. He was one of the city watch their commander had begun to throw like dice into parts of the city the gold cloaks had stopped walking. He had been told to keep order. He did not know what order was when the rain flattened everything into the same color. On the 6th day, Ned went to see the king at practice. Robert had decided that a hammer is not a cup, and that he missed one of them from his hands and it was not the cup. He lifted the warhammer and swung it, and the earth complained where it fell. He moved like a big man who had learned the cost of carelessness and did not like paying it anymore. When he saw Ned, he grinned with a flash of the younger man who had gone dancing in on the trident where death was all around him and loved the dance. He came and clapped Ned on the shoulder, and it was a lighter thing than it had been a year ago. "I am a fool," he said, panting happy, "but not as much of one as I was. This thing remembers me. I was afraid it would not." "Your hand remembers it," Ned said. "Your heart will too." "Sentiment," Robert said, but he was pleased. He touched the haft like a man touches a dog he has forgiven. "What does Stannis say in his letters? Does he scold or does he scold?" "He scolds," Ned said. "He also suggests. It is a fine distinction, but an important one." Robert snorted. He looked over at the statue of some old warrior someone had put in the yard and given a spear. "He will never forgive me for being myself." "Perhaps he should not," Ned said mildly. "We need one man, at least, who can count without flattery." Robert laughed aloud. It was a good sound, and men in the yard turned involuntarily at it, the way men turn at the sound of a horn they have not heard in too long. It rained again that night, but softer, as if the sky were being careful not to wake someone. Ned went to bed for the first time in days without feeling watched by the walls. He dreamed of the north. He dreamed of the godswood at Winterfell with its old face and the rope swing he had carved for his girls when they were small, and the way the pond held sky like a secret. He woke with the name on his tongue that he had not said for years to anyone but Bones and a weirwood stump, and he put his hand over his mouth and said it again to the darkness. He did not know if he cried. If he did, the darkness kept it for him and no one else. In the dawn, he went to his table and wrote to Winterfell. He wrote to his wife of her garden and the mills and the spring that should be rerouted through the lower fields, and of Bran's leg, which the letter could not touch, and of Robb sitting his horse as if he had been born to it, and of Rickon who needed less coddling than anyone believed. He did not write of Jon. He could not. He did not write of the Queen or of the King's new sobriety on some days and its absence on others. He did not write of the Lannisters. He wrote that she should be easy with herself and that he would come home. He meant it. He did not know if men who mean to come home are always allowed to. In the kitchens, a serving girl burned her hand on a pan and said, "Mother's tits," and then looked around as if the gods themselves would strike her, and her friend laughed and kissed the burn and said she had other parts she could swear by and use too. The master of stores counted barley and had to count it again because his mind wandered to a woman in the silk market who was too old for him and had never given him a second look. In an alley, a cut purse picked the wrong man's pocket and got a knife in his belly for the price of the coin. The wrong man was very likely wrong only in that moment. Often they are wrong often and you do not know it. In the sept, a priestess of the mother said prayers for sailors and got her skirts caught on a nail as she got up and swore in a low voice and then blessed herself because she had. The city breathed. It did not care whether truth had come to it. It had room for one more truth the way a fat man has room for another cup of wine. It would hold it. It would digest it slowly. It would turn it into some other thing. On the wall, Jon learned to see in white the way men learn to see in the dark. He learned to find the horizon in a sameness of light that could blind. He learned the voice of ghost silence and the way the wolf's ears told him what he could not hear. He learned to make himself wait. He learned to sharpen his knife with patience. He learned to look at a cliff and see where an enemy would think it looked lowest and to go somewhere else. He did his duty. He did not think about what the letter said and did. He thought about it all the time. He did not speak to anyone about it. He spoke to Sam about everything else. Porridge and a book with a picture of a dragon in it that did not look like any dragon could ever have looked and seemed more like a lizard that had eaten a furnace, and the feeling of being very small under a sky that wants to be large. One night, after the moon had gone down and the stars had come out like holes stabbed in the fabric of the world, he stood on the wall and put his hands on the ice and said, without meaning to, "Mother." And the word was taken by the wind and torn into such small pieces he doubted anyone could find them again. If gods listened, they did. If they did not, the ice did, and the wolves and the ravens with the knack of language. It was not a story that would be told in a single room. It would be told in many, in corridors and under arches and in fields and on ships and in beds. Men would come to it and give their own versions of it and call others liars. But in the Red Keep on a morning when the king did not hunt and the hand did not hold his tongue any longer, the shape of the realm shifted. It would take time for some to feel it. It would take time for others to learn its name. Far away, across water and cities and heat that had nothing to do with politics, a girl with pale hair tied her sandals and looked at the red door in her mind that meant home and tried to understand why her husband's hands had been gentle and then not. Why the old woman who rubbed her feet and sang to her in a language she had almost learned cried when no one was watching. She put her hands on her belly and felt nothing yet and everything. And she looked up at the sky and told herself something was coming for her, and she did not know whether it would ask for a bow or a knife. The world moved toward her without haste. In the morning, when the rain had gone and the stone steamed a little under the new sun, Ned walked with Robert along the ramparts. "I will go north," Robert said abruptly, staring out into nothing. "I will stand on that damned wall. I will piss off the end of it and dare some ancient ghost to scold me. I will tell your boy, no, not your boy, he groped and dropped it. I will not tell him what he is. I will see him," he grunted. "If I do, perhaps I will be less of a fool than I was. The North is honest. It will not let me lie to myself. The North is many things, your grace," Ned said. "It is blunt. It does not care for flattery. It has long memories. It does not reward liars who tell beautiful things. It is a good teacher if you do not mind a little pain. It gives you exactly what it has and nothing else." Robert laughed. "Then I will bring furs. I will bring all the furs in the 7 kingdoms and disgrace them by wearing them. I will put a crown of wolves on my head if it will make me warmer." "You might find warmer company in simpler crowns," Ned said dryly, and then saw that for the first time in many days. His friend's face had light in it that did not come from wine. They were not saved. Not yet. There is no moment when a thing as large as a realm changes from danger to safety. It slides, scrapes, it wakens. It takes back breath from places it had not known it left it. It is sometimes saved by small acts, the putting down of a cup, the picking up of a hammer, the reading of a ledger by a man whose eyes are not what they were, the burning of a letter by a man who had kept it too long. So Ned walked. He listened. He told the truth in portions he could bear. He wrote letters and sealed them and watched birds bear them up. He spoke softly when soft words would serve and hard when hard would. He stood sometimes at the edge of the godswood and put his hand on an old stump and did not pray, because he did not wish to ask for anything more. He wanted only to be worthy of what he had already been given. A chance, late, ill-favored, dangerous as any fight he had ever known. He did not say so. He did not need to. The stump had no face, but it understood. Behind them all, winter watched, patient, with a patience that cannot come from man. It was content to be kept at the threshold a while. It would test every bar and bolt in time. It would come when the doors had been mended properly or not at all. A truth had been spoken. The weight of it lay across the land like a new fallen snow. Quiet, changing everything, and no one could pretend the tracks they would make would not show. Stannis brought the book as a soldier brings witness. In plain dress, wrapped in rough cloth, inked by other men's steady hands. He unwrapped it on the Solar's long table, the thick pages smelling of the dust of 100 years and the oil of fingers that had turned them. It was an old friend to him, this dry genealogical tome, the lineages and histories of the great houses of the 7 kingdoms, and there was nothing he liked better than the way it could not be sweet-talked or bribed. He did not preen. He did not look for anyone's eyes. He smoothed a page with the edge of his hand as if to iron thought itself. Robert drank water. When the cup was empty, he stared at it as a man stares at a thing he has never held in his hand before. He was listening to Stannis the way a man listens to a whetstone, knowing there would be sharpness at the end of it and some discomfort while it was being made. "The histories are clear," Stannis said. His voice was hoarse with the salt of Dragonstone and years of being a man who said things that were not liked. "The Baratheon line throws black. Always. It is not artistry, it is breeding. The seed is strong." He tapped the table with one nail. Orys Baratheon, the bastard brother to Aegon the Conqueror, himself black of hair. His sons and their grandsons, everyone wed to wives of this house and that, fair-haired, brown-haired, red-haired. The children come black. The line does not lie. He turned another leaf with care. "Look, Lord Lionel Baratheon, black. Lord Raymond, black. Lord Stefan, your father, black. His sons, black. You, Renly, Stannis." He did not say Joffrey. He did not need to. He let the page sit and the city's noise creep under the door. Ned watched Robert's jaw. If you knew him, you could see how much motion lived under the king's stillness. A muscle moved near the ear. The hand on the cup tightened. He turned to the window as if to bring the light to the page rather than the page to the light, then away and back. He was not a man made for books, but there were ways to read that had nothing to do with letters, and he was doing that reading now. Ser Barristan stood, behind and a little to one side, silent as a carved saint. Peter Baelish had been asked to come and had demurred with a smile about numbers that needed his divine attention. Varys had not been invited, and no one expected that to keep him away from what was said. Pycelle had been excused. He was old and would think himself owed for being left out. Renly had found a reason to be elsewhere. Stannis's presence made him itch in his skin. Robert turned a page and then another and then another, his thick fingers clumsy, gentle as a man can be when he finds himself handling something delicate. He stopped at a drawing of the Baratheon stag carved into a lintel stone of Storm's End, lines of rubrics attending, marginal notes in 3 different hands from 3 separate maesters who had found the same fact and recorded it in 3 different ways for 3 different lords. He read none of it. He put a hand on the black lines in the drawing and pressed as if he could feel the HEW marks in old stone. When he lifted that hand, he breathed out. "The seed is strong," he said, and it was both an acknowledgement and a prayer. Stannis did not soften. "Your get are fair-haired. The Queen's brothers are fair-haired. There is not a single issue on record of Union Baratheon Lannister to throw fair out of dark. Not one." He did not raise his voice. He never had to. "Your Grace has seen it too. He has looked and seen and chosen not to count. Law cannot choose not to count." "Don't preach to me about law," Robert said. His voice had the old boom in it, but less drunken thunder. It rumbled like a coming storm over dry grass. "I know what it is to be held by it. I know what it is to cut it. I don't need a damn book to tell me what my eyes tell me every day." He pushed the tome a little away from him with his fingers spread, as if it might remind him of more things than he wished to remember. "I am not blind, Stannis. Never was." "No," Stannis said. "Will you act as a seeing man?" Ned felt the moment like the small tilt of a ship that tells you a wave is under it you cannot see yet. He kept his mouth closed. He had spoken enough for one lifetime. Robert stood up and moved to the window and looked at the city as if it were a field, and he had to reckon what might grow from it with the soil and the sun he had. He was less like himself and more like himself, both at once. "Call it what it is," he said without turning back. "Not mine. Not mine by blood." He made the words sit in the air and watched them the way a boy watches a fire he has set, fascinated and appalled. "What would you have me do? Put my sweet girl in a cell? Put the boys on trial before the realm's eyes and let the vultures pick? I know what the law names a man who raises another's brood in ignorance. It makes a fool of him songs will laugh at when he's dead. And if he knows and does nothing, it makes him something worse than a fool. A liar, a weakling. He bared his teeth at the window. I am no weakling. Then do not act like one, Stannis said. And the rebuke was so cool you could have used it to lay your cheek on if fever had you. Let us not begin by telling the realm anything. Let us begin by telling the law. The King's Council has a duty of counsel. We will take witness in private. We will record. We will judge what must be done with prudence. If there must be a great council, you, alive and sober, will call it, not a boy with soft hands. If the queen must be confined, it will be done under rule, not rumor. For an instant, a very small thing like mercy moved in Stannis' face and was gone. They are children. Their mother's sin is not theirs. Robert turned to look at him, and for once there was not unkindness in it. Listen to that. Stannis telling me to be merciful. He ran a hand down the side of his beard and laughed, and it was not a happy sound, but it did some work inside him that eased a knot. Very well. We begin with witness. I will have the girl and the boys to me. I will have the queen. I will have maesters' books and midwives' tongues. I will have my own eyes. What then? When the truth is not just in this room but walks about in boots and eats bread with men who would sell a loaf for a secret. Ned spoke then, because he could not keep silent like a piece of furniture forever. Then you do what you mean to do, but slowly. You let your men replace those that do not answer to you. The city watch must be your watch, not theirs. You make Slint count, Stannis will stand over him and count again. You call up the ships that owe you and make their captains swear now, while there is still ease to swearing. You move men in from the Stormlands, honest men, and you do it under the excuse of sending supplies north. You do not tell a soul what you do not have to tell. And then, when you can, you speak, and you do not fear your own voice. Ser Barristan nodded once, as if to himself. When you speak as a king, your grace, he said in that old courtly voice that could make harshness sound like a lesson. Men will hear you. Someone must sign for the things that will follow. Better it be a man I trust. Robert lifted his chin at that. You always did butter me as if I were bread, he said, but he looked almost shy with it. He had never learned what to do with loyalty, save slap it on the back and drown it in ale. By mid-afternoon Ned had Jory and 2 others saddled and riding down to the Street of Steel. It had been a small voice in his head for days, the same voice that had whispered to him in another life to follow a thread through old ink and a whore's house and a child in a smithy with a hammer too heavy for his arms. A thread that led him to the thing everyone pretended not to see. He would not break it now. If he was to bring a king evidence and not just fear and anger, it would not be a book alone. Tobo Mott's forge was a church. Men came because something sacred happened there and left with objects that had a kind of holiness laid on them by heat and hands. The air was full of sparks and the smell of iron sweating. Ned stood at the edge of it and let the warmth reach him. Jory went inside and spoke to Mott in a low tone that made the Tyroshi's eyebrows climb and his mouth draw down in calculation and respect. The boy came from the back like he had always been there, and no one of any importance had ever stopped to look at him. He was long-limbed, clumsy, with a new strength that had come into him before he knew how to spend it. He had a face you would call plain in a room with finer men and handsome if you saw it honest in the street. His hair was black as coal. His eyes a blue so clear Ned felt something cold in him stir at the sight. The boy stood with his hands greasy and his breath a little fast because a lord had come to see him. "What do you make?" Ned asked, and his voice was not stern because he remembered boys with hammers and fathers who were not their fathers and secrets that lay in them like seeds caught in a furrow. "Horseshoes," the boy said, as if there were no other answer. "My master says I'm allowed the nails next month." It was pride disguised as humility. He looked at the floor, then up through his lashes, then at the Lord, then away to the fire because it was easier to look at. "He gave me a day with a helm last moon. I bent the rim more than I meant to." "Tobo Mott does not forgive bent rims," Jory observed cheerfully. The boy glanced at Jory, at Lord Stark, at the master, then back. I'm better now. What is your name? Ned kept his voice low so the question would feel like a hand reaching down rather than a command thrown. Gendry, the boy said. Ned nodded once. The name had a dull sound he had heard in country halls, common, sturdy. It was no name any courtier would choose. Your mother, the boy licked his lips. She was a fair-haired woman, M-Lord. She had yellow hair. She said we came from the Kingswood. She died here. There was a man, Ned said. He did not put it as a question. He did not need to. He visited with coin sometimes. He did not stay. The boy's throat moved as if he were swallowing something hard. He was big, he said, and it came out in a rush like iron pulled from quench. He held me up by my arms when I was little and I thought I flew. He bought me a wooden stag and I lost it. He looked at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. Master says I should not think on it. Master is wise, Tobo said very quickly, as if the subject had burned his fingers often. The boy is my apprentice. He is good. He will be very good. Lords take an interest in his hands. I have had offers for them. I declined. I think I would be wise to decline again. Ned said nothing to that. He needed nothing as base as a bribe to learn what he had come to learn. He let his eyes rest on the boy's face until the boy raised his chin and met them, ashamed and proud both. Robert's eyes had never learned how to be careful. It had always been his pride and his weakness. In the boy they had the same frankness. The seed is strong, Stannis had said, but Ned had known that without the book when he saw Gendry, as surely as a man knows where north is when the wind smells of snow. Keep to your work, Ned said. Learn to lay a straight line with your hammer and you will never go hungry. The boy nodded and looked relieved in a way that hurt Ned's heart. He bowed awkwardly, then remembered himself and bowed again, less awkward this time. His eyes flicked to Jory and back and slid away. There were things boys did not ask for that grown men had to see. Outside, the light felt cleaner. Jory spat and grinned because the smell of iron had got into his mouth. He looks like the king, he said simply. He looks like himself, Ned said, and they both let the difference sit between them. In the afternoon, Robert went himself to the forge with only Selmy and Stannis and Ned for shadow. He strode in like a big bear in a house that had been built for smaller creatures, shook his hair like rain, and stopped when he saw the boy. The sight stole his ribald greeting. He did not turn to his companions. He did not have to. He walked until he was within arm's length and then stood as if at some border he could not cross. The boy, not knowing what to do, did what he had been taught. He knelt, and his face went red with the heat of the forge and the fear that had sprung out of nowhere in him like a hair from grass. The king put a hand on his shoulder and lifted him up by it, gently. What do you make? He asked. Horseshoes, Gendry whispered. Do they hold? Robert asked, and his voice had in it something that startled Ned, something almost shy. They do, your grace. Good, Robert said. He nodded as if he were approving some army formation. A horse that keeps its feet keeps its rider. Men don't think of things that hold them up until they fall. He swallowed. Work hard. Tobo Mott will beat the laziness out of you if you don't. And if he doesn't, I will. Tobo bowed until his nose almost touched his own boots. Stannis watched, face impassive as if to hide assent. Barristan looked away because he was not ashamed, but he knew the sight was not one a man should watch as if it were a play. When they had gone, when the heat of the forge swallowed the king's presence like a mouth swallowing a morsel it had never expected to taste again, and the door had swung back to its ordinary creak, Gendry stood very still and thought he would never forget the weight of the hand on his shoulder, or the way it had trembled for a moment like a beast learning a new restraint. Winterfell was quieter than King's Landing by nature, and now quieter still from necessity. Maester Luwin had set the boys to lessons with a vigor that made them think him hard until they understood what it was to have work that carried you somewhere beyond your own walls. Bran had learned to sit straight in his new saddle, legs st. wrapped, weight carried on his hips and the muscles of his back. And when he called the horse came, as if the animal had understood that pride needed something to stand on. Hodder lifted Bran in his arms like nothing. Bran said Hodder back to him in jest, sometimes to make Hodder laugh and feel the simplicity of being needed. Robb rode out each morning while the mist still lay in the low places and the direwolf's breath made them look like creatures too fine to be whelped of common bitches. He counted men and grain and words and did not think himself a lord because of it. He did not have time to wear the idea proudly. It was like a cloak he had to fling over his shoulders and tie tight so the wind would not steal it. Catelyn kept the household like a general keeps a campaign, without kindness to herself, and with an order that came from long practice and a love she did not know how to spend except in the doing. She wrote answers to Ned's brief letter as if words were small stitches in a seam that might tear if left untended. She told him of the weather and the millstones and the way the lower field was taking the rerouted water, and of Rickon's furious small storms that lasted 3 minutes and then vanished, and of Bran's face when he sat a horse again, as if someone had told him he had his legs back only for that hour. She did not write of Jon. She did not think she would know how. On a day with sky so clear it looked as if the gods had washed it, a party of men came up from the east gate with a wildling woman and 2 men roped and sulking. The woman had a cut lip and hair like bracken, and she stared at Winterfell as if at something that had grown out of the ground by magic and stolen a piece of the horizon. Theon rode with the men and grinned because, for all his grins were a mask, he liked having something to bring home. He had not yet learned the cost of such victories. He had learned to call himself a Northman when it suited him. They brought the wildlings to the hall, and Catelyn listened as a lady listens to what men have done on her border. The woman called herself Osha and did not cower. "The woods are wrong," she said in a voice that had its own wind in it. "You people have your walls and your fat bellies and your fires made up neat. The woods are wrong. You think they'll stay up there, the things that walk when they don't have heat in them? I don't think that." Maester Luwin made a polite sound and a small note on his wax. Theon smirked. Robb looked at his mother and then at the woman and then at the sky in his mind. "We have a wall," he said, "and it was dutiful, and it convinced no one in that room and also did not need to. Duty is sometimes a bridge you stand on because there is no other bridge." "We had," Osha said. "Walls are for men. Other things don't need them." She showed her teeth and the cut in her lip opened again and bled a little. She licked it and tasted iron and laughed as if at a joke the South would never get. "But you do your lording, little wolf. You tie me if you like. Everyone ties what they're afraid of." Catelyn sent them to the cells and had the woman treated and the men fed and the rope loosened and the guards set. That night she went to the Godswood and sat with her back to the old trunk and listened to the leaves move. She had never learned to speak with this god the way her husband did, but she had learned to let it speak to her. Said the same thing it always said: "Be patient, be still, be steady, be strong." She did not always want those things. She wanted her children safe and her husband home and a world that had not become full of shadows with names she did not like. She smoothed her skirts and sat. When she went in, she stopped at Bran's door and watched him sleep without letting her breath make a sound. He did not stir. In the corner, Summer lifted his head, nose working, and then laid it down again. At the wall, Jeor Mormont stood over the 2 corpses brought in from beyond by a party that all had the same tightness around the mouth. Men who had seen something they did not understand and wanted to be angry instead. The bodies were wrong. They should have gone limp and soft and begun to give back what the world had lent them. Instead, there was a hardness to them that made them harder to look at. Their hair was brittle. Their skin felt cold even by the standards of a place where warmth was a rumor. The old bear grunted and scratched at his head. "Burn them," he said, "like the wildlings do. I don't care what tale you tell. Tell them I am an old fool with a superstition if you need to. Burn them." Eamon listened to the report and afterward sat alone. He had known winters that had taken things without asking. This winter had not yet arrived, but it had sent its heralds out. He folded a cloth and unfolded it. He thought of letters arriving at a small table in a tower where a boy could barely keep his hand from shaking when he read words that made him both heavy and weightless. "His mother?" Eamon murmured to himself, and smiled a private, pained smile that did not belong to any living woman. "It is always the mothers." He put a wrinkled hand on the table. "We will need all the brothers," he said aloud to a bird cleaning its feathers. "Even those who do not yet know that is what they are." Jon trained until his arms were water and then sharpened a knife until his hands stopped trembling. He did not tell Sam what had happened in that cold chamber where the corpses lay until the fire took them. When he did it plain, like a man telling the weather. Sam had little fat now around the eyes. Fear had burned it out and left something purer. "The dead should stay dead," Sam said. "That is why men have songs. To keep it so." "They are only songs," Jon answered. "They are what we have," Sam said. In King's Landing, the street was a damp serpent that writhed under the feet of men who did not know they were treading on a living. G-Thing, Littlefinger and Varys walked together like two men who had just discovered conversation and wanted to share the surprise with no one. Varys's hands fluttered and made confession without confessing. Peter's smile sat on his mouth like an ornament you could not remove without breaking the hole. They took a turn through a passage where washing hung overhead like flags with secrets in them, then went down a stair where a rat looked at them with the open curiosity of a creature that does not have to pretend. At the bottom of the stair, the smell of the river came in, metallic, old. "Unsettling," Varys said. "How a single morning can lift the tablecloth of a kingdom and show the stains underneath." "Ah," Peter said, "but stains are so instructive. You can read whole histories in them. Here, the wine that was spilled when a lady laughed too hard at the wrong joke. There, the grease from a pie a lord stole from a kitchen and ate hastily in a stairwell lest he be seen to have an appetite. I confess I find them humbling. Our great doings rendered as smudges on linen." "You did not find this morning humbling," Varys said mildly. "You found it irritating. All that work to put the right cups into the right hands, and the damned hand decides not to lift any of them." Peter glanced sideways. "Do not mistake me for a man who cares for cups. I care for where the wine goes. It will go somewhere. It must. If it goes to the north and the wall and the fat bellies of frostbitten oath-takers, so be it. Men will still need coin to move grain and guards to keep them from eating it on the way. Arrangements can be made. Besides," he added, "our king is newly in love with virtue. There is nothing more profitable than virtue, for it must be purchased and displayed." Varys laughed in a breath. He went to a forge and found his face in a boy. It is a cruel thing being a father, or so I am told. He looked at Peter with something almost like pity and then let it go. "The queen feels cornered, which you know, because she sent a bird that flew through my window with feathers that had been carefully smoothed. She will not do anything large while she thinks small things will save her. She does small things like a man does large with bravado," Peter observed. "And her father hears everything and arranges it in rows like soldiers. He will not let his banner fall." "If anyone dies, you will say you warned them," Varys said. "If anyone lives, you will say you saved them," Peter replied comfortably. They parted like two dancers finishing a figure. Varys went to the kitchens. Littlefinger went to a counting room and lifted the edge of a tapestry to look at the dust behind it. As if there were a secret there he had hidden from himself and now wanted to surprise. Cersei sent sweetmeats to Pycelle and a silken favor to Ser Boros and a softer word than usual to Janos Slynt. She spoke to Joffrey about mercy until he rolled his eyes, and she struck him across the face to remind him who had taught him the word. She wept in front of her maid and said she was afraid for the realm. She sent an invitation to supper to Lord Stark and then sat very still when he declined. With Jaime she did not pretend. They stood close enough that anyone looking through the keyhole would have blushed from envy. "He means to shame me," she said, and it was not a complaint. It was an iron bar in her hand. "He will do it with paper and whispers and men who smile to hide the smell of their fear. He will not do it with a sword, because he thinks himself so much better than that." Jaime turned his head and considered the light on her hair, as if he meant to paint it later for a man who could not afford his price. "He thinks himself better than most things. That is not a flaw in a lord. It is a danger in a man." He smiled, slow. "Say the word, and I will help you." "You would kill him," she said in a dead, starved voice. "I would," he said gently. "Or not. Tell me what shape you want, and I will carve it." She thought of fathers and sons and the way men liked to think of themselves as carvers of other men's shapes. She thought, I will do this with silk first. If silk tears, then steel. That afternoon Arya chased a cat and found a door that did not look like a door and squeezed through and found herself in a place where the air changed. It became thinner, older, as if it had been breathed less often. She moved instinctively as Syrio had taught her. Point first, soft step. Eyes see everything and nothing sees you. Voices slid along the stone, not like sound so much as like threads drawn through cloth. She pressed herself against a pillar and listened, not because she was curious, but because the world had told her too many times lately that listening is living. Have altered your song, said a voice that made the hair along Arya's arms lift. It was sibilant and soft and wrapped itself in peahen manners. You said you would bring us a corpse. Instead you bring us a king who did not die and a hand who grew a spine. I said the world is full of careless men, said another voice, deeper, thicker, with a wet chuckle like a man whose belly got in his breath. I did not say when or which. Your fat king will die yet if I send him boars enough. We will need a different pig, the first said delicately. For now we must fatten our own. The Silver Lord smiles, and it is a blade. The king's brother counts with a jealous scale. The hand walks as if the north wind held him up. It is a charming play. I would see how it ends. It ends with fire, the second man said, and Arya could hear him wipe his hands as if to clean them of some imagined grease, and that disgusted her more than anything, because she had never liked men who pretended they had not done what they had done. It always ends with fire, or blood, or both. She would have liked to see their faces, but she had learned something now that went beyond seeing. She slid away and no one nodded. Ed, because the castle has bones older than most secrets and it protects what it wants to protect when it chooses. Sansa sat with Myrcella on a window ledge where the light made their hair glow like a saint's, and she sang softly of roses and knights and the way a man's heart can swell like a sail if a lady looks down at him kindly. Myrcella knew the words and sang the second part without thinking. Her voice a clear thing that did not deserve the rooms it was in. Joffrey came and stood below them looking up, and his face made Sansa's voice stumble and then smooth itself. The hound leaned in the shadow, watching with his melancholy dog's eyes. You sing too much, Joffrey said to Sansa, as if telling a stable boy he had mucked a stall poorly. I sing as much as is seemly, Sansa said, and her heart did a rabbit's flutter and then stood still. Your Grace, call me that again, he said, and smiled, and the smile had knives in it. There are those who say the word will not fit my head. Perhaps they would like to see another head under a crown. Sansa looked at the floor, then at his boots, then at Myrcella, who gave the smallest shake of her head. And Sansa smiled with her mouth because that was what she had been taught to do. No one says such things, she lied. You are very brave. Only jealous men would say otherwise. Jealous of what? He asked, and he wanted her to say it aloud. She did. Of you. The hound's mouth twisted. He looked at Sansa closely until she shifted under it and then away. He followed Joffrey a little later down a stair, slow. You like nasty talk, boy, he said. Don't call me boy. You like talk that cuts and leaves no blood you can see, so you can pretend you haven't done anything. Sandor went on, indifferent. It's a pretty trick for a prince. Be careful it doesn't turn and cut you, too. Are you threatening me? Joffrey demanded. But his voice slid on its own anger. Would I need to threaten? Sandor asked, dry as new bones. I am just reminding you. Knives know their owners if they are used too freely. Robert summoned Pycelle to his chamber and made him stand a long time while he asked bland questions about herbs and heat and whether there were midwives in the city whose tongues were not for sale. Pycelle perspired into his beard and said many words that meant nothing and tried to sound old enough to deserve being listened to. Robert let him talk because it kept him from doing something else. When the Grand Maester had exhausted himself with counsel that invited no decision, Robert said thank you in a way that meant you have given me nothing, and Pycelle tottered away and stopped outside the door and put his hand on the wall as if he were old. He was old. He was also a liar. It is possible to be both. Robert poured water and did not drink it and found that his hand made circles with the cup on the table as if counting prayers. At Dragonstone, Cresson held Stannis's letter and looked out at a sea that had been a friend to him longer than any man. Melisandre stood with her hands folded in her red sleeves and watched the old maester read, and smiled to herself, and then let the smile slide away. She had seen flames that showed a boy on a wall with a white shadow beside him and a white cold rolling like fog. She had seen a man with a forge's light on his face close his hand on something he had only just learned he wanted to keep. She had seen the shadow of a stag fall across a map. She did not say what she had seen to the old man because he would not understand. He understood other things, and she did not despise him for that the way others might have. She would take his poison if he brought it to her. She would drink it as she drank all men's offerings and make of it what she could. For now she watched the sky and murmured a line in a tongue no one here had learned. Celis came, thin lips white. "Will my lord go to the capital?" she asked. Melisandre nodded once and held out her hand, and Celis took it with her fingers like twigs and gripped as if the heat of the woman beside her could enter her bones by mere touch. They stood together like two women warmed by a thing only one of them could see. In Dorne, the letter from King's Landing was opened by a hand that trembled because its owner never allowed himself to tremble in front of men. He was alone among his citrus and his pain. Doran Martell read of the king who did not die, and the northern lord who had turned the board with honesty, and the whisper of a marriage a long time ago that had made a slut of his sister in men's mouths only because men could not imagine another story. He put the letter down, closed his eyes, and for a moment saw his brother's face when it laughed. He put that away too. He made small, neat decisions. He sent a letter that would take a long time to arrive to a man who had lived too long in the soil of the East. He called for his daughter and told her a tale of water gardens and patience, and made her angry on purpose because it would be better for her to be angry now in a place where the water cooled her blood than later where everything burned. In King's Landing, Stannis met with Slynt and put him under a kind of pressure the watch captain had not known the proper name for. It was nothing so simple as threat. It was arithmetic. Men, coin, posts, rotas, bread. Slynt sweated until his shirt stuck to him. Stannis did not soften for a single moment. At the end, Slynt left and went and took a walk that brought him, quite by chance, a man would have said, to Peter Baelish's counting house. He came out with his mind easier and his pockets heavier and a list of men who might be moved into places Stannis would not think to watch at once. There were always lists. Peter kept them in his head and wrote them only on dust. Ned ate with his daughters that night and listened to Sansa recount a song as if it were history, and to Arya tell a story about a cat that had no moral except that cat. Go where they will if you are not quick. He watched them quarrel and not go too far with it. He made his face into something the girls could lean on. Afterward he went with Jory to the barracks and sat with his men and drank weak ale and heard the way their talk had changed without their knowing it. They spoke less of going home, because the word home had slipped a little in them and now included work still to be done here. They spoke of grain, and of men on the river, and a new levy of pikes that had turned out to have ash hafts with too much sap in them. He told them they would be paid before the week was out and meant it. When he returned, Varys was in the corridor outside his rooms like a peeved shadow. "My lord Hand," he said and put a hand to his heart. "A little bird tells me the queen thinks of a ship that leaves," Ned said, and his voice was like the wind in the neck where the reeds sing and the water remembers men who tried to run through it. "Possibly," Varys said, "possibly only a threat. There is a captain who has received a purse. There is a steward who has packed things that are not hers. There is a girl who was told to bring a doll and a boy who was told to bring his favorite knife. The doll is already in the chest. The knife is not." He spread his hands. "If she runs to Casterly Rock. From there, the rock runs to the realm in its own way." "She will not run," Ned said. "She will test." "She will," Varys agreed. Immense courage in such a small face, to bare the teeth so prettily and hope no one notices the drool of fright. He looked at Ned's face as if trying to find a door in it. "You are not afraid." "I am always afraid," Ned said. "I have children." Varys bowed. "As you say, perhaps then you will find this useful." A little bird with golden hair cried to me that a boy with a sweet face and a sword too fine for his hand is to go riding tomorrow with youths and pages and a few men who have sworn to him and not to anyone else, to a place where the road is narrow and rumor says highwaymen have been seen. He fluttered his fingers. How unfortunate it would be for highwaymen. They are such patriots. They so often appear when a man has a need. Tell your bird to hide its feathers, Ned said. We will be there before dawn. They were, and Joffrey's ride took a different turn. The narrow road and the men with earnest faces and light purses found themselves watched by 20 of the Hand's Guard and 6 of the Lord Commanders and 2 of Stannis's grim-faced Stormlanders who had never learned the art of smiling. Joffrey laughed and said they were going to hunt rabbits instead. Arya knew when men were lying because they moved wrong. Joffrey moved wrong all over. She looked at her father and he looked at her, and for a moment the world became clean between them. On the ride back, the Hound threw her a glance that men throw other men when they know they are in on a joke, and she blinked at the novelty of that and filed it away. Day piled on day. Letters flew. A Septon was found who had recorded a marriage in Dorne a year before the tower fell. His page smeared where blood had dripped on it from his nose when he bled in the cold. The smear traced and lifted with an old marshman's patience until the names came up clear enough to be sworn to. 2 knights who had served at the tower's foot were found in the reach and the fingers. One had turned to piety and was afraid of the world. One had turned to apathy and was afraid of nothing. They told the same tale, with the same number of candles and the same cold hour. Robert heard them and left the room and went to the yard and hit a post until his hand split, and then let Selmy bind it. In the long quiets between motions, men felt something like snow in the air even when the day burned their shoulders. That is what a turning feels like if you are paying attention. On the far side of the world, the Dothraki Sea rolled and made no noise except the sound of grasses whispering together about ancient things. Daenerys Targaryen rode and learned. She learned to sit without flinching. She learned to ask for water like a queen and drink like a girl. She learned the words for wind and for pain. She learned the difference between a man who speaks harshly because he has to and a man who speaks harshly because he likes it. She learned Jorah Mormont's careful courtesy and the way his eyes watched not her but the circles of danger around her. She learned the smell of life growing inside her as if it were a garden planted where no garden had ever been. She remembered the red door. She found herself standing next to a woman with a face like old leather who said she had been a healer in a town that was now a stain on the ground. Everything ends, the woman said to Daenerys, not unkindly, and took her hands and turned them palm up and clicked her tongue at their softness. But not yet. When she sang, Daenerys did not understand the words, but she learned the shape of them. Khal Drogo looked at his wife with the eye of a man who has got more than he paid for. He had not expected a queen. He had expected a girl. When he was gentle, it was not because he knew how to be. It was because he wanted the thing he did not know how to name that he saw when she sat with her head bent over a basket of steaming water and made the air around her smell like clean cloth. He took counsel from a man who had learned to lie to himself and call it honor, and from another who had learned to tell himself truths too cruel to eat. He took counsel from his mother of bellies, who beat servants with a stick and kissed his son's unborn head through his wife's skin. He would ride west when it pleased him, if it ever pleased him. He was in no hurry because he was a man who could make the world come to him. Tywin Lannister stood before a table with a map on it and set a small carved lion down with exactness where stony September lay. He did not scowl. He did not smile. He said to his steward that a levy must be raised without noise, and to his son that he would not move a foot until he decided where to place it, and to his daughter by letter that she had always been clever, but cleverness could not save a fool if the fool was himself, and she should decide whether to make her husband her ally or to make him her enemy. The first was hard, the second easy and foolish. He wrote to Jaime, and Jaime read the letter, and afterward sat for a long time polishing his armor and looking at his reflection in it that had somehow learned to look back. On the 7th morning Robert went to the Great September. He did not go to kneel. He went to sit and let the coolness of the stone take something from him. The mother looked down, and the father and the smith and all the rest with their carved patience. He sat under the stranger and did not flinch, because he had learned long ago that fear only made a man more appetizing to the thing that stalked him. He thought he was alone. He was not. The old septon who kept the lamps moved without being seen. A boy with hair the color of honey knelt and whispered to himself. A woman whose husband had not come back stood with a hand on the mother's marble foot. Not praying, just leaning. Robert looked at them and felt something that did not have a good word in his rough mouth. He lifted his head and looked up into the stranger's hard face and said, without sound or with it, even he did not know, that he would not die like a boar in leaves while Cersei sharpened quills. He said he would see the wall. He said he would set something right, and if he could not, he would at least stop making things worse. The stranger looked back. Indifferent, interested, amused, cruel, all the things men tell themselves their gods are when they need the excuse. There was to be a private taking of statements in a small cool room with a polished table and high windows. No tapestries, no pretty woodwork, no place to hide. Stannis had arranged the chairs as he arranged his thoughts. Ned had braced himself to recognize names from old days and to keep his face from breaking when he heard Lyanna's where it had always belonged. Varys would not be there. He already knew too much. Peter would not be there. He knew things and pretended he did not, and that did not fit such a room. Ser Barristan would be there. A sword that had become a man would be fitting witness to a second marriage no one had wanted. Pycelle would be escorted there like an old goat to market. Before that there were still hours. Hours are what politics is made of. In one of them, Arya took the long way back to her room and found herself behind a wall where men had forgotten there was a passage. She heard the hum of a hive of secrets and did not push her ears into it this time. Sometimes the best way to live is to not learn something you cannot safely carry. She went to the yard and found the boys fencing and set her feet and remembered each of Sirio's words and none of anyone else's. She did not smile. She did not speak. She moved until sweat ran down the small of her back and her breath went harsh but kept time. The next time she saw the hound, he nodded to her once, curt, as men do in winter when the road is clear and you pass and do not want to waste warmth on talk. Sansa went with Septa Mordain to deliver baskets of bread to a poorhouse because she had asked to, and in that heat and stink learned more about gratitude and hunger than any song had ever taught her. She lifted loaves and set them down in hands that shook and said, "Mother keep you," and meant it and surprised herself. On the way back she saw a man beating a rug with a switch and thought he looked like a poet and then laughed under her breath at herself because Arya would have called her a ninny. And in that moment she loved Arya with such fierceness she could taste it. Ned went to the Tower of the Hand and signed 3 more orders. He sent a message to the City Watch to move 2 posts nearer the river and 1 away from it. He sent a boy he trusted with a note to Tobo Mott. Keep the boy busy. No more visitors. He wrote to Winterfell again and told Catelyn things he had not meant to say. That he felt sometimes as if he were standing in a field where he had set a fire and must shepherd it so it would not eat the wrong grass. He finished and sealed and blew on the wax as if to cool something else too, and when he turned, Jory was there with his easy grin and his steady presence. There are men you can put between you and the world because they make the world behave. Jory was one. Early morning ride, Jory said, cheerful. No narrow roads, my lord. Nothing at all happens on broad ones. That is why we take them. Keep your men off the wine, Ned said. There will be time to get drunk later. Will there? Jory asked companionably. I have always wondered when exactly that time is. His grin softened. We will be careful. They were, for as long as care could help. It is a cruel thing that care sometimes makes the knife come sooner, because the man who means to stab you is also careful. There is no lesson in that, only a note. The room with the high windows was cool. The witnesses came. They moved their tongues. They said what they had said to themselves for years and almost believed, and then the truth that stood under it all, and the way it felt to lift it and put it down between other men and watch it every time in its nakedness. Robert sat with his big hands spread on the table and his shoulders squared as if he were about to lift a thing heavier than any hammer. He did not reach for drink. He reached for names and held them, one by one, in his mouth and rolled them on his tongue, and swallowed them like bitter draught. He did not look at Cersei when she came in and sat and folded her hands as if at a sermon she had moved up to the front row to hear. She answered with courtesy and lies that were better than OT. Her people's truth. She smiled twice, and each time the smile made men's mouths dry for different reasons. When it was over, no one said what had been proved. They did not need to. There are silences that hold judgment. Stannis closed the book and tied the cord around it with a neat, strong knot. Ned stood and felt older. Barristan went out and put a hand on a stone wall and stood there for a long time because the stone did not care what he had seen and it steadied him. Cersei went back to her rooms and broke a goblet and told the girl to clean it up and stood barefoot with glass in her skin until it hurt enough to satisfy something that would not be satisfied. Robert went to the mews and stood among birds and looked at them as if they were men and picked up a falcon and set it down and did not know what to do with his hands after that. That night, when Ned went to the Godswood, he did not kneel. He stood and let the night be what it was. The stump was quiet. The leaves said nothing that could be put into the words of the South. He put a hand on old wood and thought of a baby with black hair and lungs like a bellows and of a woman who had said a name and closed her eyes. He thought of a boy on a wall with a white wolf and the breath of winter moving over him like a thing that listened back. He thought of the way truth is like cold. It wakes you and hurts you and makes you see. At the wall, Jon dreamed of a courtyard he had never stood in and a woman's laughter he had never heard. And he woke with his hand on Ghost's fur and Ghost's heart beating steady under it, as if to say, here is one thing you can count, if you cannot count anything else. He got up, dressed in the dark, went to the yard, and set himself to cut and guard and cut until the stars pulled up their spears and retreated before the color that came in the east. Day after day, the circles went outward. A baker in the city woke with a headache and worked anyway and sent a loaf with an extra handful of poppy seed to a woman he had once loved. A wharf rat found a coin that had rolled under a piling and hid it for a week and then bought a sweet and ate it so fast he bit his tongue. A hedge knight sat on a low wall and thought about whether it was worth it to go north for a promise of pay and decided no. Then stood and found his legs carrying him there anyway because he had remembered a long time ago a man who had shown him how to put a pot on the coals in such a way the porridge did not burn, and the memory's warmth moved him more than coin. A septon with breath like an old cellar lied to a woman about the god's will and was ashamed and did not stop. A mummer took off his mask and was surprised to find his face had learned its lines. The world lives in such things. The great houses do not notice. One morning, a raven from Winterfell landed heavy and cross on Ned's windowsill. The letter was in Catelyn's hand, and it told him Bran had stood upright for 3 breaths with the aid of his brace and shouted for people to come see, and no one came in time, and he had fallen and laughed and sworn in a language he had invented because he wanted to make swearing his and no one else's. It told him Robb had taken 3 men's oaths and held them by looking more like his father than he had any right to at his age. It told him Rickon had run away and been found in the crypts sleeping with Shaggy Dog's head in his lap and Hodder standing guard like a tree with a little boy leaning against it. It told him the wildling woman had put her hand on the heart tree and not flinched when she stepped on a thorn, and that Maester Luwin said very wise things about Northmen and Southron gods, and the woman had spit and said the gods are not ours. We are theirs. He read it twice, and the second time he saw the way Catelyn's lines grew unsteady when she wrote of Bran. He pressed the paper to his lips and then set it down and stood with both hands on the table and looked out his window at a sky as blue as the eye of a boy in a forge and told himself he would see the north again under winter sky, and if he did not, he would at least send it what it needed. On the Dothraki Sea, Daenerys put her hand out and the grass slid under it like silk made of blades. She felt the child move. She laughed from sheer astonishment as a woman does when her body shows her it is capable of something she had not believed. She looked at the horizon and thought of a throne she had only ever seen in men's voices and told herself she did not know what iron felt like. Only silk and sun and the press of a strong arm. She saw a bird cut the sky like a thrown knife and told herself a thing very few queens ever learn. That there is time. Felt like a secret. She kept it. In the Red Keep, the king sent for the master of ships, who was now also his brother. They bent over a map with grease spots and wine rings and measured not just distances but loyalties, and where a man might go at short notice without having to ask his wife to mend his socks first. I will go north, Robert said again. I will go and see the wall. I will take 100 men. No more. We will go as quietly as a king can go, which is not very, but enough to avoid banners. He put a finger on the line of the King's Road as if it were not a road but a nerve he meant to test. You will keep the city while I am gone. Stannis's mouth did something that on another man might have been a smile. "I will keep it," he said. "You will not do anything irreversible until I return," Robert said, and the tone had a wet edge to it. "We have pulled the cloth up. I do not intend to rip it." "I will not so either," Stannis said. "I will keep it from mildew." Robert laughed and pulled him into an embrace that was more like a blow, and Stannis endured it like a tree endures wind. When it was over, Robert looked both foolish and pleased with himself. He went out to find Selmy so they could talk of saddles and boots and what kind of flint a man sh old carry when he means to get through weather. He was happy in the way a man grows happy when he has decided to move his body some distance and let his mind catch up later. In a gray room that held a box and not much else, Cersei planned. She planned for the possibility that she would be taken, that the boys would be declared something and something else, that the city would turn its head. She planned for the alternative, that nothing would happen. She planned to poison a man and then threw the thought away because poison is something for women who have no other weapons, and she did and would not demean herself. She planned how to make a ride look like flight and flight look like a ride. She planned how to cry in such a way that men would forgive her for something they would never forgive in another woman. She planned who would die first if she had her way. She planned a smile to put on her face if she did not. Far to the north of the wall, something walked that had no warmth in it and did not see the world as humans do. It moved in a silence that made a sound, if you knew how to hear it. Ravens rose and wheeled and settled again like soot. A fox stopped and listened to nothing, then bolted without knowing why. The first temporary snow of a late autumn fell where no men could see it, and on it things wrote a language with their feet. The language did not care if anyone read it. The wind read it and understood. Ned went to his bed late and rose early and turned like a man caught between two duties, neither of which would let the other be fulfilled. He put on a plain cloak and took 3 men and slipped out before the sun was high to ride to the Street of Silk, where he spoke to a woman who made him tea with mint in it and told him truths much cleaner than many lords' lies. He went to an apothecary and bought comfrey because he had taken to chewing it the way a man chews on a problem, and the old woman behind the counter told him to spit it out more often if he wanted his stomach to last him into winter. He went to a bookman and bought nothing and let the man talk until he learned in that torrent of words what he had come to learn, that there had been a ledger in a certain sept and a certain page not where anyone honest would keep it. He wrote 3 words on a bit of parchment for Varys. Have it watched. Varys would watch it. Varys watched everything. It was what he did when he was not being helpful. A week passed, and then another, and Robert did not go to hunt wild boar. He refused 3 invitations to ride and 1 to a masked revel that would have made his belly jiggle with laughter a month ago. He ate better. He drank less on most days. On some he drank like the old days because the new was sharp, and he would always be himself, and the old ways knew where his throat was. He sparred with men and hit posts and sat with his children and did not know how to talk to them, so he told them stories. Myrcella listened gravely and asked him at the end which parts were lies, and he said all of them and none. Tommen shyly asked if he could hold the warhammer, and Robert handed it to him without jesting, and then took it back quick when the boy's arms went out with its weight. Joffrey smiled with his mouth and counted the ways in which a warhammer could be used on different parts of a human body, and made eye contact with Sandor while he did it. The hound looked over the boy's head at the king, and for a flicker of a moment they were 2 soldiers looking at the same order and neither liking it. When the day came to leave for the wall, the city stood and watched, and there was less cheer than any king would like. Some were glad, some were wary, some were relieved. The sound of hooves on stone is a very particular sound. It is the sound of a thing already begun. Ned rode at Robert's side. Ser Barristan sat tall behind them. The men Stannis had chosen were stone-faced. The men Ned had chosen were ordinary and careful. Sansa stood on a balcony with her septa and waved with a hand that did not tremble. Arya hung upside down from the very same balcony after the septa had turned away and bared her teeth at the notion of propriety. Cersei stood behind a curtain and watched and did not move a muscle in her face. Stannis watched and then went back to his counting rooms, where he would count until his mind had made a wall around him of numbers and words and the law that he believed could save men if they would let it. Renly arranged a dinner with 3 very pretty people and laughed until his stomach hurt, and then stopped and stared at the candle's flame until it wavered and went out. They went north. The King's Road unrolled under them, and the air changed from salt to leaf to earth and promise and then memory to cold. There were houses where people ran to the roadside to stare, and men took off their caps too late, and women curtsied too low and then couldn't get back up without help. There were inns where the ale was brackish and the stew thin and the bedbugs ambitious. There were dawns with mist like milk, no color in them except the blue of Ned's eyes and the black in Robert's hair. There was a day when Robert turned his head and saw a hawk drop from a high circle like a stone and come up with a rabbit in its talons and hooped like a boy. There were nights when he lay on his back and looked up and listened to the sound of his own men snoring and thought how odd it was to want nothing but that sound. At Winterfell, the bells rang. It is not often a keep rings its bells because it wishes to. Usually it is because something is coming that it cannot avoid. This time the bells rang for joy. Catelyn stood with her hair newly done and her face set in the shape she had worn the day she had married a stranger and found him good. Robb brushed his doublet and stood a little behind her because he knew what lines were and when they mattered. Bran was carried out by Hodder, who hummed to himself as if to calm a large Immel that might otherwise bolt, and set down gently on the chair that had been built for him with love and oak. Rickon would not be held and ran the last 10 paces and then stopped suddenly when he saw the men and the banners and the crowd and did not cry, to his own surprise. The direwolves moved with them, shadows and muscle, eyes that understood more than they could say with their mouths. Robert came through the gates, and for a moment the years did a trick and lifted off his shoulders, and he was the man who had come here long ago full of wine and thunder and grief and made feasts happen by roaring at cooks. He slid off his horse with less grace than in other stories and went to Catelyn and took her hands and pressed them and kissed her cheek and said he had missed northern bread and northern mercy and northern stubbornness, and she smiled and said something polite and kind and did not break. He looked at Robb and saw Ned's blood in a younger face and felt the pinch of that and said he would teach the boy to drink when the time came, and Catelyn said very dryly that the time would never come if she had anything to do with it, and Robert roared with laughter. He went to Bran and his face changed. He crouched awkwardly in a way that made his knees crack and put a hand on Bran's shoulder. "How do you do, little lord?" he said more softly than he had intended. Bran looked at him with grave eyes that had seen more kinds of falling than they should have and said, "I will ride to the wall one day." And Robert said, "So you shall, and you shall see me fall off a horse." The men laughed, but he did not. It was a strange moment. The wolves watched it with heads cocked. They feasted as northerners do, with meat and stories and less show. Robert ate well and drank better and did not make an embarrassment of himself. In the night, when the fires in the hall burned down to coals and low voices stayed long after others had rolled into blankets, he and Ned slipped away and went to the crypts with torches that did not so much light as make the dark step back a little out of politeness. They walked between stone figures who had held their swords across their laps a very long time and were in no hurry to get up. They stood before Lyanna's statue. Robert's breath went out of him in a long sigh that belonged to a much younger man. He reached out and touched stone hair. "I did not understand," he said, and for once there were no flourishes on his words, no lantern light thrown on them to make them prettier than they were. "I held a picture in my head so long I made it God." He looked at Ned. "She would not have liked that." "No," Ned said. "She would have laughed at you and thrown flowers in your face. Then she would have told you a story about a horse that bit her and expected you to be interested." Robert huffed and nodded. "I have been unfair to the dead," he said, "and to the living." He put his hand on the stone again, and for a second he looked like a man laying down a burden in a place where there is no one left to take it, and then he took his hand away because he was a king and had to carry what he had brought with him. Above them, in the wakefulness that comes when a keep has been filled again with men and voices, Catelyn lay with her eyes open and listened to the sound of the night she knew better than the back of her hand. The creak at the end of a long corridor where the wind finds a leak in the shutter, a mouse in the grain room, the heavy exhale of a guard falling asleep against a post. She thought of a boy in the south who was not her own and had been a stone in her shoe she had learned to walk with without wincing. She thought of her husband, and the shape of him as he slept, and the way the room felt different when he was not in it. She did not pray. She turned and let the warmth of the bed get into her bones, and said in herself that she would not ask for anything more than what had been placed in her hands already. Morning brought a hard frost, the kind that makes breath visible and clings to hint at the coming season without committing to it. Robert stamped his feet and exclaimed loudly, and was taught to tuck the edge of his cloak under his belt the way men here did to keep it from dragging. He ate porridge like a starving man and pronounced it better than any spiced cake in King's Landing, and demanded another bowl and got it. He went outside and clapped men on the back and peered at the working of a millstone and proposed awkward improvements and laughed when a miller told him politely why they would not work. He watched Bran ride the yard on his leather and iron saddle with a look on his face that made men step away without being told. After a while he went to the Godswood with Ned and stood in front of the heart tree that was a true one, red leaves and pale bark and a carved face whose tears had cut grooves. And he looked at it and then at Ned and then away, and he did not say that this god made him uneasy because he did not say such things. He said, "This is a good place." And Ned said, "Yes." And that was enough. From Winterfell the road to the wall is a stretching of the world, a narrowing of it too. Trees thicken, fields fall away, the sky grows bigger and becomes something that has weight. The horse's breath makes banners of itself. Men speak less because what is around them has its own speech, and talking over it seems discourteous. The direwolves came and went like ghosts that have decided to be kind for once and not frighten anyone to death. The second night, when they camped under a stand of pines that broke the wind, Robert sat with a bowl of stew in his hands and told a story about Harwin Hardhand that had nothing to do with the truth and everything to do with the kind of king he would have liked to be if he had been born with the right shape of head. And men laughed in the right places and warmed their hands at the fire and at the sound of a voice that had conquered low Inigo and found itself conquered since by more subtle foes. At Castle Black the men stood in formation when the king's party rode in and did their best to look like soldiers and not like what many of them had been before they came here. Jon stood with them and kept his eyes ahead and did not look for his father until his father was in front of him and looking at him, and then he looked. The look said more than any letter had been able to stuff into paper. Ghost stood beside him, a piece of snow that had learned to move with thought. Jeor Mormont came forward and made his gruff respects and presented his men like a miser laying out coin and trying to make it look more than it was. Maester Aemon stood in the sun like a fragile artifact that should never be touched, and Robert bowed to him without jest, and the old man's clouded eyes gleamed as if they held a joke he shared with no one. "Your Grace," Aemon said, and his voice was the sound of old wood that has been rubbed smooth by hands. "You come where few come. It will repay you." "I mean to see," Robert said. "You will," Aemon said. "You will see what you can, and what you cannot." Ned stood in the yard with Jon and said nothing and let his hands say what they could with touches to a shoulder, a cheek. He took Jon aside for a moment so no one would hear but the wind and a wolf. "You are taller," Ned said. "You are the same," Jon said, and could not keep the warmth out of his voice. "You look as if you had slept outdoors." "I have been sleeping in a city for too long," Ned said. "It makes a man forget what air tastes like. This place remembers it." They walked the wall. They stood with their capes pressed back by the same wind and looked out over the frozen mystery that was the haunted forest, and men named 100 times because they feared it, and naming is one way to make the thing you fear small. Robert took his gloves off at one point and put his bare hands on the ice and hissed. "I like it," he said. "It's honest." "Honesty can still kill you," Mormont said dourly. Robert grinned. "So can lies. I prefer to see it coming." They went to the armory. The king hefted a new forged sword and complained about its balance, and made the smith laugh and then sober because it pleased a smith to be judged by a man who knew steel for itself and not for show. They went to the rookery and Robert ducked because the ravens have a way of taking air around a man as if they meant to steal his hat, and he laughed like a boy. They went to the kitchens and the king demanded a heel of the day's bread and ate it too fast and choked and thumped his own chest and swore. Jeor Mormont thumped him too with more relish, and everyone pretended not to smile. At night they sat by the great fire in the Lord Commander's chamber and spoke of things men rarely speak of when they are being careful to be seen. Mormont told a small story about his mother's hands, and no one asked him why. Aemon told a smaller story about a kite he once flew as a child in a courtyard that smelled of orange peel, and if it was unwise to say such a thing aloud, no one told him so. Robert spoke of the trident without bluster, and his voice emptied out, and when he came to the part where everything after had been less, he stopped. Jon listened and felt the shape of the world tilt under him and tried not to think about the tilt inside him that had begun with the letter and had not righted since. He stood when it was proper and left when it was proper, and went up to the wall and breathed the night until it took something from him and gave something back. Dawn on the ice is character. It shows men what they are. When he came down, Jon found his father waiting at the foot of the stairs. They walked together once more along the yard. "There are things I must tell you," Ned said finally, when the quiet had become another person walking with them and he could not bear the crowd. "There are things I cannot." Jon nodded. He had known this would be the shape of it. "Is it about my mother?" he asked, and the word was a knife and a bomb both. "It is," Ned said. "I will tell you as much as I can without breaking promises I wish I had never had to make." He paused. His mouth made a shape it did not make often. "She was brave. She was full of a kind of mischief. She would have laughed at me for speaking of her this way." He forced himself to smile. "I will tell you the rest when I can tell it without throwing you into a pit." Jon swallowed and felt his throat hurt. "You will come back," he said, and he made it a statement because he was tired of questions. "You will come back and tell me." "I will," Ned said. "It is never wise for a man to make promises to the world." He made this one to a boy, and the world heard anyway. He put a hand behind Jon's head and pressed his brow to his, briefly, as he had when Jon had been smaller and Scrapes had needed this gesture more than they had needed salves. Ghost nosed their hands and made a low sound that was not a growl and not a whine. On the last morning, when the king went to piss off the edge of the world as he had boasted he would and came back wiping his hands and grinning like a man who had completed some childish vow, a horn sounded. It was not an alarm, only the morning signal, but every man in the yard looked up because horns look like people to soldiers the way thunder looks like gods to peasants. Life resumed. Men moved. Orders were spoken. Mormont grunted. A raven croaked a word and no one liked it. Ravens do that. They tell truths whether they mean to or not. Riders came up the road from the south in a hurry that was not the hurry of a courier. Ned's body knew it before his eyes did. The posture, the dust, the way a horse is ridden when the news is not words but fire looking for a throat. They pulled up in the yard and the lead rider swung himself down and pulled out a leather tube and shoved it into the Lord Commander's handsbeck. As it was written to him, not the king, and that was important. Mormont slit the thong with a thumbnail and read. His face did not change. He passed it to Ned. Ned read. He did not pass it to Robert until he had felt his heart settle into the right place for what would happen in the next few breaths. Robert took it and his eyes moved and his jaw worked and he laughed. A single hard bark that would have been joy if joy were cruel. Tywin Lannister had called his banners. It was like a piece in a game being moved wearily to the place it was always going to go. Men began to speak. The yard filled with words that hoped to make order out of familiar chaos. Stannis would count ships. Renly would write letters. The queen would do whatever it is queens do when they are afraid and proud. The king would go south. The hand would go with him. The wall remained. In the long view, nothing had changed. In the days of men, everything had. Robert rolled his shoulder as if to fit a saddle to it. "Damn him," he said, and there was no heat in it. Only a great tiredness a man will not admit to. "He waits until I am at the bloody edge of the world to move, so I must ride twice as far." He looked at Ned. We go," Ned said. They went. On the road south, men rode harder. Jon watched until they were only a line and then a blur and then a thought. He turned back to his duty because there is nothing else to be done at the end of such mornings. He moved through the day with the knowledge in him like a stone in a pocket you keep touching because it keeps you upright, and when he put his hand on Ghost's ruff and the wolf leaned, he felt less as if he had been asked to hold two breaths forever. South, the world bristled. Lords told their wives to pack and their sons to stand tall and their maesters to write and their cooks to boil beef. Tywin's banners came loose from their poles like lions that had been tied too long and were glad of the fight. Cersei held court and smiled at men in a way that told them she could not be bowed but would allow it. for now. Stannis made lists of names, Janos Slynt with a mark beside it, Peter Baelish with a dot, Varys with nothing, because Stannis was honest enough to know he did not know what to put there. Renly held a little revel that made men forget to choose for a night and then made them choose more fiercely. The small folk spread rumors like seeds, and some fell on stone and some in cracks. On the Dothraki Sea, Daenerys felt the child turn and said a word in the tongue of a people who had never met a Targaryen, and watched the way the wind took it and carried it as if it had weight. She looked at her husband's back and thought of a city she had never seen, and for the first time did not fear it. She feared something else she could not name. She laughed because fear without a name is like a horse without tack. It will run itself out. She slept and dreamed of a wall of ice with a boy on it, and a man beside him with dark hair and an honest face and a sadness in him like winter. She did not know what it meant. She told no one. The king and the hand rode, and the miles turned, and the day's light did the small work of wearing away the hard edge of one thing and the other. Fall came down over the world. Grain moved north and men moved south. In a room without windows, a woman counted knives. In a room with too many, a man counted prayers. The city tightened its belt. The north loosened its and took in air as if it had been too long bent over a ledger. At night in the camp, the firelight lit Robert's face and made him look at once older and younger. He told Ned a joke about a maester and a pig that was too crude to be repeated, and then said nothing for a long time and finally said, as if the words had been stewing in him and needed to be ladled out before they burnt, "Do you think I can save anything?" Ned looked at him and did not put a hand out because he knew Robert too well to touch him just then. "I think you can choose one thing and hold it," he said. "Sometimes that is what saving is. Choose it and hold." "And if I let other things go?" Robert asked, and there was a boy's fear in it. "Then they go," Ned said, and watched the truth land. "The world is big. We are not." Robert nodded. He drank water and made a face and drank more. He looked at the sky and named 2 stars wrong, and Ned corrected him, and they bickered in the low old way of men who have already forgiven each other more than once. Then Robert drew his cloak up and lay down and turned on his side and did not sleep for a long time, and when he did he snored like a man trying to frighten his enemies by noise. In King's Landing, Varys stood at a window and looked out and tapped his fingers together as if counting birds. He thought of all the threads he had knotted and how some had been cut by honest men, and what a marvel that was and how useful. In the Vale, Lisa Arryn walked her gallery with a candle and told herself she was safe, and thought of knives and poison, and the way the world looks at a woman with tears and sees exactly what it wishes to see. At Riverrun, Hoster Tully coughed and spat pink into a basin and sent for letters to be answered and called for his daughters in his mind and found only one. In Sunspear, Oberyn sharpened a spear and smiled and said nothing to his paramour because he was not ready to make a jest of the thing yet, and that surprised her. In Pike, Balon looked at his net and found it empty and decided to cast when men were not watching. The sea watched. It is older than kings. Each night the cold came a little earlier. Each morning the sun made its way up a little slower. The realm did not know where it was going. It never had. It did not know that a man had put his hand on a weirwood stump in a southern godswood and told a truth that had melted a piece of ice somewhere far to the north, or that a boy on a wall had stood with his hand on a white wolf and felt for a breath that the world could hold. It is not the realm's work to know such things. It is ours, and there was time to know them, and time to set more stones on top of one another, and time to eat and drink and sleep and ride, while men who cared counted grain and men who wanted counted knives, and sometimes they were the same men. Winter waited. Truth waited. Both of them patient as the sea, and just as relentless.